Okay, we're going to start. And we're going to start with this. Good morning. Good morning to all of you attending in person. Good morning to all of you Zooming with us out there. I'm Mike Albrecht, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the TUCARE's 28th Natural Resource Summit. TUCARE is short for Tuolumne County Alliance for Resources and Environment. And although we've hosted 27 past natural resource summits, this is our first virtual COVID-19 California on fire presidential election around the corner and Dodgers win the World Series summit. And we pray our last, especially the Dodgers winning the World Series part. And I just had to throw that in, I'm sorry. This would have been an easy summit to cancel. And there were plenty of recommendations to do so. But in the end, our TUCARE staff and board of directors decided the issues and challenges we face in our forest just can't wait another year. We have to start identifying right now steps we can agree on that will take lives lost, homes and businesses destroyed, and acres incinerated out of the headlines and replace it with forests, California's forests, the envy of and the example of the world. How can we do this? First, we'll need to agree on the theme for our summit. Where there's a will, there's a way. My belief is the way part of this aphorism is the easy part. At the Associated California Loggers Annual Conference, our theme was, "We are the solution." That simple theme was not meant as conceited or trite, that simply unleashing the prowess of California's 450 to 500 logging and trucking contractors to run willy-nilly around California's forests cutting trees is the solution. However, thinning our forests today with modern logging systems will be a big part of the solution. But first, we need like-minded agreement from the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, the Bureau of Land Management, our forest products industry, and environmental organizations, and our legal and judicial systems. We need like-minded agreement from all of those folks. Agreement that we've seen enough destruction and waste of our resources and environment, and that we will no longer stand by while California continues to import over 75% of its wood products from other states and countries, and America remains the second leading importer of softwood lumber in the world, only behind China. The fundamental question is, do we have the will to, as one of my colleagues recently said, make powerful change in how we do things? My hope is that our speakers, along with the virtual forestry tour TUCARE has provided, will help answer the question. Do we have the will to right the ship that I'll call the USS Forest Resources that is currently headed in the wrong direction and sinking? Can we finally trust each other, logger, environmentalist, and government, to work in our forests at a much faster pace and a much larger scale without 500 to 1,000 page documents that basically say 3 words: follow the rules? Can we finally agree that the time and money wasted in court is holding us all back from truly working together to save our forests, which filter water into the ground and produce the very air we breathe? Let's get our summit started. Let's see what we can learn. I'm going to end my opening remarks with this. You're about to hear from some very good and well-meaning people. And I ask that you listen with an open mind. But, as my grandma always reminded me, keep an open mind, but do not let your brains fall out. Okay, our first order of business is to take you on a virtual forestry tour. Our summit always includes a woods tour that requires at least a 3-hour round-trip bus ride that leaves some folks queasy, tired, needing to use the restroom, hungry, and thirsty. So today you're going to get to tour right from the comfort of your own homes, in your office, wherever you're at. And you're going to hear what I call a forest management good news story. So let's get going. And then before we start, everybody here, please silence your cell phones. Thank you for that reminder. Yeah, please silence your phones. Okay, we'll go ahead and start on this bus tour. Well, I'm going to start by saying good morning, and it is morning here. It's about 10 o'clock, but some of you folks may be watching this later in the day, so good afternoon to you or good evening, whenever you're watching this. I want to start by saying thank you for taking time to watch this video. I think you're going to find it enjoyable, educational. I think you'll learn something about the forest and how we do business in the forest. Who are we? First of all, I'll tell you who I am. I'm Mike Albrecht. I'm a member of TUCARE. TUCARE stands for Tuolumne County Alliance for Resource and Environment. And TUCARE's been around since 1988. And people go, well, what's TUCARE all about? I'll tell you, what I say is we show people how rural America works, how things are produced in America, mainly natural resources. We show a lot about energy, water, branching, cattle. Today we're going to talk about the forest. And I'm going to tell you, today is going to be a good news story. This is going to be something I think you're really going to like. There's a lot of bad news going on right now. You're hearing about fires, you're hearing about floods, and then a lot of bad things going on in the forest. This is a good news story today because we're going to show you how we used to do things, putting timber sales together, and how we're doing them now. And we're really able to speed things up, do things at a lower cost, and I think you're going to like what you see. You're going to see some equipment working, and it's going to be good. Real quick, who am I? I'm Mike Albrecht. My partner is here. She's off camera, but her name's Stacy, and we own a company called Cerro Resource Management. We've been around since 1993, and we specialize in thinning the forest. We've probably done 50 or 60,000 acres of forest thinning, and it's because we got a really good crew. We come from a logging legacy. I want to tell you, Stacy's dad, Joe Martin, and her mom, they've been in the logging business since 1953, and a tremendous legacy. Our company's been as large as 22 trucks and 80 people, and moving 50 loads a day. We've downsized a lot. We got a smaller crew, but we're still here and still glad to be doing what we're doing. I want to show you how we used to do things in the forest. This is a timber sale that is ready to be logged, and as you can see, there's a lot of trees out here. Really one of our main goals out here is just to get fewer trees per acre. Take out trees that are smaller and unhealthy and promote the growth on the trees we leave behind. So what you see are a lot of trees marked in blue. Everything marked in blue will be cut and removed. And that's the way we've been doing things with the forest for decades and decades. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it takes a lot of time and effort to go out and mark every one of these trees and figure out which tree needs to come out. You have to take it takes a lot of looking and marking and a lot of work. We're going to show you how we're doing things differently now, and we'll get to that at the next stop. But it's a real neat program. I want you to know that this country, the United States of America, we use a lot of wood. We use 50 to 60 billion board feet of wood every year. And well, how much is that? Well, this is a board foot. And so 60 billion of these, it's a lot of pieces. And the best way we've ever come up to illustrate that is if you start stacking these board feet into the sky and head to the moon, Well, the moon's 240,000 miles away. 60 billion board feet would go up to the moon and back and up again and back over 45 times. So you can kind of let that sink in for a minute. That's a lot of wood. And that's just how much lumber we use in America. We use a lot of other paper products and such. So there's a lot of great reasons to thin the forest. We want to protect the wildlife. We want to keep the forest from burning down. We want to have great watershed. These forests are tremendous watersheds. If you think about it, they're like umbrellas out here, breaking down the rainfall so that it filters into the ground, goes down to our meadows, and finally into our rivers. I don't think people think enough about these trees give off oxygen. These are the lungs of the earth. You folks, I don't know who all I'm talking to, and you're all smart folks, but you got to remember some basic things. We exhale CO2. These trees need CO2. They take in CO2 out of the atmosphere and break it down to oxygen and carbon. The carbon gets stored in the tree. That's called wood. And the oxygen goes off into the atmosphere, and that's called, great. We breathe that. So it's a great relationship. I give God the glory for that. Other folks may say, well, that's a great part of evolution, whatever you think, but it's a wonderful relationship. So keeping this forest healthy, there's a lot of good reasons for it. But we got to remember we use the wood products. We need wood. We use a lot of wood. I think you'll probably be shocked, some of you that hear this. The United States of America is the second leading importer of lumber in the world. Okay, let that sink in a minute. Now, I'm not talking about exporting wood. We're the second leading importer of softwood lumber in the world, only second to China. So, as our forests are burning and rotting and in a lot of cases getting wasted, we're importing lumber. So that's something we really want to turn around. I think we can, and I think we will. Whether we do timber sales like this, or whether we do timber sales like you're going to see at our next stop, which I think are the wave of the future, we have a great partnership with some folks here, and they're called the U.S. Forest Service. U.S. Forest Service is managing your land. This is public land. It's owned by you. If you're watching this as an American, this is your land. You own it. You hire the Forest Service to manage it. They do a great job. And we have a good relationship with the Forest Service. They've been doing it since the early 1900s. So working with the Forest Service, we're really proud of what we're doing out here. And you hear a lot of bad things about maybe what's going on. We're going to show you some really great things going on today. We've really advanced on how we do stuff. So California is 100 million acres, if you just the whole landscape. 33% of its forest. California imports about 75% of its wood products from other states and other countries. So we can do a lot better in California. Instead of watching it burn, we can start making more product. California used to have 150 sawmills up to about 25 years ago. 150 sawmills. We're down to 27. Our industry's shrinking. And we need to get back to where we have more forest management, make more products, and do a lot more things that we could do. On our national forests in the United States, we harvested about 12 billion board feet, quite a bit of timber. We're down to about 3.5 billion board feet now. So we've reduced our harvests on our national forest by a lot, 400% in the wrong direction. We're starting to work that back up with our current leadership and the Forest Service directives. We're starting to work that back up. We used to harvest in California 4 or 5 billion board feet. Now we're down to about half a billion. So big numbers, but the point is we've really reduced what we're harvesting to a point, hey, we got to get this going again. And working with the Forest Service, they recognize that. It's starting to go in the right direction, but it's really kind of bottomed out. It's time to go back up. And we're going to show you here how we're doing things differently from that last stop. We're going to show you how we cut timber now and for the future. And what we're doing now is we're actually allowed to cut the trees, make the selections, and really what I'm saying is we're trusted by the Forest Service to follow their guidelines without having to have the timber marked in any way. And we're going to show you how we do this, but it's a really great program. And I'm going to have the Forest Service a little later describe a little bit more about how we do it, but it's called Designation by Prescription. So the Forest Service prescribes what they want out here and pretty much say, guys, go make it happen. So it skips all the timber marking, it skips some of the layout, and puts a lot of trust in the loggers. And this is part of our crew right here. And no matter what else you see or hear me say or these guys are the ones that make it happen. We get documents that are 4 or 5 inches thick. We do planning, we have meetings. It takes years to put a timber sale together. And after all that's said and done, if you don't have a crew of people that can make it happen and do it right, you might as well forget the whole planning process. Antonio on our left, he's our Director of Operations. He runs the crew. Next to him is Raphael. Raphael is the one that runs the machine that cuts the timber. Raphael does a lot of the layout out here. He figures out what am I going to cut, what am I not going to cut. Raphael is as good as any forester that's out here right now. I've got a master's in forestry. Raphael knows more about what's going on out here than I do. Next to him is John. John's a timber faller, and we're going to have him cut a tree down. I'm going to call it the old-fashioned way, with a chainsaw, how we used to do it. And we still have to do quite a bit with chainsaws. And John's been falling timber for many, many, many years and is super, super good at it. Next to John is Chris. Chris runs about anything we've got out here if we want him to, but he runs our biomass chipping operation, but I think the only thing he doesn't run too much is this machine we're about to show you, but he can run about anything else you see out here today equipment-wise. Chris can run it. These guys are fantastic loggers. Can't say enough about them. And so, hey, one other thing I want to say, these guys represent for our company about 80 years of experience. These guys haven't been doing this for like just the 5 or 6 years. These guys have been at this a long time with our company. We're proud of that. But I want to describe this machine real quick to you. This is called a feller buncher. These have been around a long time, but relatively not that long. We've been using feller bunchers to mechanically cut trees really in a big way in the last 20, 25 years. I'm going to answer some questions that people typically ask. How much does it cost? Everyone's, okay, that machine set up like that, if it was new, that'd be about $600,000. So it's an expensive piece of equipment. The one thing I'll point out on the front end of it, how it cuts a tree, you can see the saw sticking out. So it actually has a chainsaw built into the head of the machine that cuts it. You'll see it grab the tree, it can pick the tree up, set it down, and it's a pretty cool piece of equipment. It'll cut a tree on the base. It can cut a tree almost 30 inches in diameter at the base, but it can't pick that up, but it can cut it and lay it down. To cut and pick up a tree about 24 inches. What you're going to see is what's the big difference out here. Everything Raphael's going to be cutting, none of it's been marked. There's no tree paint on this. Raphael will make all the tree selections. He's going to decide what trees are going to be cut. He's following a Forest Service prescription that I'm going to ask Brian McCrory to talk about after we cut a little bit. He'll explain designation by prescription. But I would say the biggest element of success out here is trust. The Forest Service has to trust that we're doing this right. And Brady, our sales inspector, does not stand out here all day long watching us. In fact, sometimes we don't see him for 2 or 3 days at a time because he trusts that we're doing it right. And if we can keep that going as we move this industry forward, a good trust relationship with the industry and the Forest Service, cutting timber without marking every tree, we're going to get a lot more done. And that's our goal, is to do a lot more of this, because we need to do a lot more of it. what you just saw is contrasted to our first stop, where all those trees that you saw Raphael cut with that machine and the tree that John cut, we designated, the logger designated which trees to get cut. And that's a big, big difference. Again, we talked about the trust involved in that. And we've been doing this Sierra Resource Management for a couple of years now. And when we first started this, it was difficult. It was hard to figure out how to do this correctly. But we stayed with it. And Raphael and John and our whole crew have gotten very good at it now. We really prefer this now. It's a real good way to work in the woods. And we can get a lot done ourselves. And the Forest Service trusts us to do it. But we follow a prescription. And I'm going to ask Brian McCory, who's actually our contracting officer for the Stanislaus. Is that the right title?
Yes.
Yes.
Timber
Okay. Timber contracting officer for the Stanislaus National Forest. He's going to describe what kind of prescription they've asked us to follow. So go ahead.
So just a little bit about designation by prescription. So the Congress gave us the authority to use a different type of designation. In the past, we'd always, had to mark timber, and through a farm bill, is the gist of it that Congress gave us the authority to use designation by description for designating timber, and that allows us not to mark everything. We can still mark some trees that we want out, and then we can prescribe others. And there's designation by prescription that we're using here, and there's designation by description. And this is a new authority that we've been using pretty aggressively on the Stanislaus National Forest. And this contract, we start by developing a prescription with the silviculturalist that looks at the NEPA and what our desired conditions are and what we're gonna be cutting, removing in these stands. So we kind of take that prescription that's written as part of the NEPA and translate that into the contract, into contract terms. So this contract is a stewardship contract that does require proposals to be submitted. And so a proposal was submitted by Sierra Pacific Industries that included identifying an operator to do the work and their quality control plan for doing the work and how they're going to follow that prescription. But I think that's a good way that we've been able to utilize designation by prescription is in stewardship contracts. And little details about the prescription. It's primarily a thin from below, but you having some variability. We have gaps designated. That's one way that we're able to designate ourselves these gap openings that we're cutting out, and those are marked, identified on the ground. And then in the general area around those, we're applying a prescription, thinning from below, taking trees 10 to 20 inches, and then 20 to 30 inches, not cutting any trees over 30 inch diameter. So the operators goes through and identifies those trees that meet the prescription to cut. And what's worked really well here is that one operator is taking, cutting what he can, and then like you saw, designating what the hand faller to come behind it and cut. So it's really that one person implementing that prescription. And then as part of the contract administration, we go behind the operation and put in plots that measure compliance of that prescription, looking at stump diameters that were left, that we didn't cut any trees over that limit of stump diameter, and then looking at that we did thin from below, left certain species, and so that work's done after the cutting for accepting that work under the contract. So that's been going really well. It's definitely a learning curve for all of us, but I felt like when I came to the forest that we really needed to embrace that new authority and use it as part of our stewardship program, and I think it's really helped us to to get these projects out. Something like this, would have taken us a whole season to mark and cruise, to prepare it for the contract to advertise. Where this, we basically gain a season because we can do the layout and do the cruising all in one season, which determines the timber that's going to be cut and the volume of timber that's going to be included in the contract. We can do that in one season compared to having to mark it and do the layout and mark it in the next season. So we save time, and then of course the cost for additional staff to do that marking, and the cost of paint, because the paint we use in the Forest Service for designation is pretty expensive. It has a tracer element in it, so reduced costs and some reduced staffing time.
So yeah, so a season, just so you know, what Brian just said, saves a year just in preparation, and that is a big deal when you're trying to put something like this together. To save a year, to save all the money involved, that's a really big deal. And I'm going to say, personally, I think as we get better at this, right now what takes a lot of time is the planning. The planning can take a long time. I think we're going to be able to speed up the planning process over time too, so that these kind of projects can really be planned pretty quickly and implemented pretty quickly. And we talk a lot about wanting to increase the pace, how fast we do things, and the scale, how broad an area we do. And you're going to find in the future, that's why I call this a good news program. We're going to be able to do this faster and a larger scale as the years goes on. And a guy like Brian and his staff, you're looking at younger people that have new ideas. They're willing to embrace stuff. Some of us old guys are like, hey, this is the way we always did it. We can't do it different. We can do it different. And this is a good example of how doing it different really speeds things up. And so that's a great outcome of this.
And one thing we're seeing too is that we're actually implementing the prescription to what it was intended. And other times, when we'd mark something, you're working with people, marking crews. Somebody gets tired and doesn't mark an area, or we miss an area. A lot of times we would have things, monitoring after cutting something that we marked individually, and that it didn't necessarily meet the prescription. Maybe we left too much. Where we're finding with D by P, we're really, because they're covering all the ground, and we're doing that in inspection afterwards, that we're really meeting the prescription as it's written, and not kind of taking out that variability of having individuals marking the timber.
And I'm going to say, I can talk about it, Brian can talk about it. Our crew gets the credit because they're the ones that make it happen. The one constraint we have out here is the prescription doesn't allow us to cut a tree over 30 inches in diameter. So those trees right behind you, they're too close together maybe, but we won't cut them, and that's okay. I mean, we're not going to get into the weeds about big trees today, about whether we can cut them or not, but that's why you're going to see some bigger trees left closer together. But trees up to 30 inches, Raphael's checking that for spacing, and then he'll cut what he can with his machine, and then he'll mark the bigger ones for John to cut. Our spacing guideline is something called basal area. We cut to 160 square feet of basal area. What does that mean? So this area of this stump represents a certain amount of area, and we calculated in how many square feet does that area represent, and we try to cut this down to about 160 square feet per acre. And basal area is how we determine how many to leave.
And that's basal, the measure that we use to translate to canopy cover. So that canopy cover that we're shooting for, whether it's 40% or 50%, is we translate to a basal area that needs to be retained to meet that canopy cover requirement that was in the NEPA.
What I try to tell people, we try to leave the forest so you could ride a horse through it. That's a good way to think about how you want your forest to look. If you could ride a horse through there and have a nice ride, your forest is thinned out just about right. Okay, where we are now is what we call a log landing. And really what it is, it's a big processing center. So this is where we take the whole trees that Raphael has cut or John has cut, and we bring them into this area and get them prepared to put on a logging truck. And how we do this is really neat. We got some real fancy equipment to do this with, and I'll describe that in just a minute. But what you're going to see is, you saw John with his chainsaw starting to cut the limbs off. These trees that are coming in, they got thousands of limbs on them. If you had that going on with guys with chainsaws, you'd get about one load of logs done a day probably. So through some really smart people, they figured out, hey, there's a quicker way to take these limbs off. So you're going to see a delimber, which is that machine right there. It's called a stroke delimber. It's going to take the limbs off. It also measures and cuts the tree into saw logs ready to put on a truck. Well, to get them to the delimber, you're going to see these skidders, which are the yellow machines up here, bringing the trees in. And you saw when Raphael cut the trees, he bundled them up kind of. That's why he called a feller buncher. They'd fall them and they put them in bunches, the Raphael's machine, so that when the skidder picks them up, he can pick up 6 or 8 trees at once and bring them all in. Really a neat system. Any of us tried to do it, we'd have it so screwed up it would be a mess. But these guys are artists at it. So that's a stroke delimber, and these skidders that bring them in are Caterpillar skidders. If you were to buy this stuff new, those 3 pieces of equipment, you'll see that'd be over $1 million right there, just for that. So you can see, as you start adding this all up, and we're going to see the chipper work in just a minute, you can tie up a couple $1 million in this logging real quick. At this stop, we're going to show you the last part of the process in the logging operation, and it's real important. It is the biomass production part of the operation. So you've seen all the logs get produced. They get put on a logging truck and taken to the sawmill. That's where we make lumber. But we also use the tops of the trees for biomass. And we, first of all, what biomass is, it's a chipped product, and you're going to see that how we do that, how we make them into chips. The biomass chips get taken down to a power plant, and there they get burned and converted into electrical energy. And it's a great process. We've had that power plant going in Tuolumne County since 1985. So we've been burning wood in Tuolumne County to make electricity for a long time. That power plant makes enough power to just about run the whole county. It runs on wood, and a lot of the wood gets produced right up here in the forest. So we're able to use almost everything up here in terms of a product. So what we're going to show you here is how do we convert the tops of these trees that are too small to make a log into a biomass product. How do we get them chipped and down to a power plant? So we're going to show you this chipping operation, and Chris is going to run it for us. We don't have a truck here today to load the chips into, so we're just going to show you how it works, and we're going to blow them out on the ground, but we'll show you what they look like. Great process. Another, close to $500,000, no, probably $750,000 tied up right here. That'll become electrical power simply by burning it, heating water to steam. Steam runs a turbine, turbine runs a generator, and you got power. So instead of coal, instead of oil, instead of nuclear, here's your heat, wood.
Yeah, and this activity is one thing that's included in this contract as stewardship work. I don't know if Mike talked about that the value of the timber pays for some of the service work like this that doesn't pay for itself.
Good point.
So it's subsidized by the value of the timber so that we can remove more fuel from the forest for that as a product to create energy but it doesn't necessarily, pay for itself for all the trucking and everything. It's very expensive to truck. So we use the value of the timber, and that's part of that stewardship, trading the goods for services.
Well, thank you. I got a feeling by now you folks are getting tired of me, so we're going to have some great speakers here come up and start talking about some other things. But what you just saw, I can't overemphasize enough, that is the wave of the future. We are going to see more and more of that kind of timber harvesting, and it really is built on trust. And young people are coming in that instead of focused on regulating us, they're focused on working with us and trusting us to get the work done. Fewer people getting more done. That's what it's going to be about. Okay, so before we get into our guest speakers, and we got some great ones here, a couple housekeeping things. My wife, Vicki, right up front, she's the timekeeper. So you folks that are talking, she will leave you alone unless you get going too long. And then she'll hold up a card that says, I think 2 minutes and then 1 minute and then like the hook. So don't get the hook. No, we'll work with you, but she'll give you a little warning on that. Okay, without further ado, is Greg, are you here somewhere? Yes, he is here. Oh, come on up. Greg Norton's going to come up. And as he comes up, I'm going to provide you with some introduction that Greg provided. And it says this: it was after the Rim Fire in 2013 that Greg Norton and the RCRC board knew something had to be done. The Rim Fire destroyed massive amounts of forested landscape, destroyed wildlife habitat, and caused immeasurable economic harm to communities in the surrounding area. In his role as president and CEO of Rural County Representatives of California, or RCRC, which is a 37-member county-strong service organization advocating on the behalf of California's rural counties, Greg, a small team of staff, and a handful of board members began a concerted research and due diligence effort directed at identifying a commercially viable use for the low to no value material found in our forest that adds to the risk and impact of catastrophic wildfires. In September of 2018, Golden State Natural Resources, a 501c3 California public benefit corporation, was formed for the express purpose of protecting and restoring the health of our forests, rural communities, and residents that call these areas home. Led by guiding principles that are focused on environmental health, rural economic development, and public safety, Golden State Natural Resources identified a potential partner of the solution that is scalable, sustainable, and potentially impactful. Like all RCRC affiliate organizations, Golden State is governed by a board of elected supervisors, and Greg Norton serves as a president. So here to tell you about all of this good stuff is Greg Norton. Thank you, Greg, for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction, Mike. Sorry about this. Sometimes you become all thumbs. Anyway, thank you again for the introduction and more importantly for the invitation to be able to share with you today. I know that the introduction included a little bit about our organization, but I would like to take a moment to share with you a little bit more about it. I'm sure many or most of you are familiar with RCRC, the Rural County Representatives of California, of which Tuolumne County is a member, one of the 37 counties. RCRC advocates on behalf of the 37 member counties in the areas of legislative and regulatory representation at the federal and the state level. And we exist to provide an increased voice for those counties that on their own often don't have a large enough voice to make a difference for themselves. What's interesting about it, to give you a sense of the need for us to all band together, is that our membership covers about 60% of California's land mass, but less than 12% of California's population. But importantly, in the context of the discussion here today, is more than 75% of the U.S. Forest Service's forest lands reside within that membership. Rural California is increasingly been overlooked as a resource for the benefit of the state as a whole. I know that all of you recognize that, although we also all know it's full of amazing resources. We have a handful of affiliate entities, of which GSNR is one, that are operated on behalf of our member counties. I want to share with you just briefly a little bit about that, and it'll help in the context of some of the things I'll share later on. Two of the entities that we have, and I won't bore you with the names and all, but more about their function, they provide for capital finance programs. These are performed in areas of single-family, multifamily, energy efficiency, renewable energy, water conservation, infrastructure finance, and other areas such as that. These entities have jointly participated in program financing of over $22.5 billion. In doing so, it's been very beneficial to the rural counties in the state in a number of ways. But what's important to today's discussion in that regard is that we intend on utilizing those capital finance skills and expertise that we have to assist us in this project. I want to share with you too that we have an amazing board of directors. Sherry Brennan, who's sitting here in the room, is among them. They've encouraged and supported us to be innovative and to do so many things on behalf of rural California, helping us to develop programs and opportunities that otherwise probably wouldn't exist. We've been committed to protecting and enhancing the quality of life in rural California for quite a long time, many years, which is really the mission of the organization, protect and enhance the quality of life in rural California communities. We've been able to look at things a bit differently over the years, and is part of what makes this organization such a great place to work with and for. We've recreated new entities where needs existed and done many other things. In addition to the primary work that we do on behalf of our members, they've permitted us to create what we're calling just a community give back operation. We've provided millions of dollars support in the last few years to fire victims, veterans housing, laptops to 16 to 18-year-old foster students, funded human trafficking prevention and awareness education throughout our public schools in our member counties. I share that with you so that you know a little bit more about our organization, excuse me, and the board of directors and of the rural counties, because they care about rural California tremendously, and it's amazed me over the 20 years that I've been there with all the board members that we've had, that it is so consistent that every one of them not only cares about their community, but rural California as a whole, and that makes a big difference in the way that we're able to operate. Most recently, we created the organization that Mike noted, the Golden State Natural Resources, or GSNR as I'll call it. GSNR and our intended project is what I want to share most with you about today. The idea for GSNR started with a simple question. Years ago, when the state was giving out grant resources to remove mortality trees that were hazardous or presented a public safety risk, because we have the skills that we do and the experience in raising capital, I was asked that if we could raise more capital, the grants were beneficial, but they weren't enough, could we raise more capital to help with that effort? That question actually came from Randy Hanbelt when he was on the board of directors at RCRC. So beginning to think about it that way, at first we started just looking at how can we get more capital to deal with that particular issue. So even before now, when we were having all these unbelievable fires and all the issues that are going on, we wanted to find a way to be a better part or a bigger part of the solution, not give just one-time money to the current issue, but be able to develop a way to be an ongoing part of the solution to that effort. One thing led to another, more and more research was performed. Terrence Rogers, who's with me today, and I have been working on this for now 4+ years. So we decided that we would provide a way for not only helping with one-time money, but to develop a project and an entity that would be ongoing. To do that, you have to have a market for the material. And so what we did, we began searching for that. We looked at cross-laminated timber, nanotechnology, all these other things that we keep hearing about. We are incredibly supportive of all those industries, but those industries in California are not going to come for quite some time, and we wanted to do something where we could both support those and have also a current market that we could work in. So over that time, it led to the creation of GSNR as a forest resiliency company, and you'll hear me emphasizing that in my comments, and I'll explain more as we go. GSNR was created only a few years ago. We received, as was shared, a 501c3 designation from the IRS, which is very important. And there are 5 current board members, all of which are elected county supervisors from within RCRC member counties. To assist us to deal with the areas where we don't have direct expertise and experience, we are working with a number of others that have industry experience, development experience, and to assist us with these efforts and we will be expanding those relationships as we continue to develop this project. In simple terms, GSNR was created to assist with forest resiliency by reducing fire fuels from our forest and by working within an existing and growing wood products market, developing an ongoing entity to focus on current and long-term success achieving forest health. We know that government assistance and support is clearly necessary for the challenges that we have. However, we also believe this resource on its own will not be nearly enough. So although we have and may continue to benefit from government assistance through our project, the concept for GSNR is to develop and to grow the benefits of the project with capital investment and reinvestment of project returns, private capital investment. We've adopted the following guiding principles that will guide us throughout this process. They'll be the heart of the activities, operations, and partnerships that we develop and that we pursue. There are multiple subcategories. I'm just going to share with you the highlight broader principles because they're important to the way that we're approaching this entire project. One is to protect and enhance the quality of life in California's rural counties, including decreasing the frequency and impact of catastrophic fires and enhancing public safety. This also while contributing to rural economic development and job creation. Number 2 is to promote healthy, resilient forests and environmental stewardship, number of subcategories under that. And 3 is to fulfill our fiduciary responsibilities that we will have to many parties, but among those items include ensuring a long-term focus on benefiting rural communities, forests, and the environment. The purpose of the entity and the project is clearly for public benefit and public purpose. The business concept is to match it's kind of like going back to Business 101, supply and demand. It's to match the current supply of biomass we have in California, and we all know that we have quite a lot of supply, and match that with the demand for industrial wood pellets in Japan and other Asian countries. The use of biomass in the place of coal is beginning to occur throughout the world. It's already been in progress for 10, 15 years in Europe. It's a growing market and a demand for industrialized pellets for wood-fired or biomass-fired energy generation. Many of the sites in Japan are already co-firing biomass with coal, and they have a number of others that have been certified for development that will be 100% biomass energy generation. That growing demand is tremendous in the Asian markets. These countries are part of the Kyoto Agreement and the Paris Accord and have a requirement to utilize renewable fuels, which many of them don't have access to in their countries or other countries nearby. And there are certain certified standards that have to be complied with, and frankly, the benefit of some of the high government regulation in those countries matched with the governmental regulation here in California is a win-win. It gives them a lot of comfort in knowing that things will be done the right way, it'll be sustainable, and that's what they want to do and work with. So we have a large benefit in that regard. That and the fact that others of the large industrial pellet producers are the two of the biggest are in the southeast of the U.S. and also in Canada. They're both doing great work. We know that we need to help with our forests here in California. We're closer in proximity to the Asian markets, and there's a lot of benefits in that regard. So anyway, there's a strong projected growth over the next handful of years for industrialized pellets in the Asian market, for millions and millions of tons annually that are needed there to sustain their energy generation. Very simply, and I mean oversimplified, summary of the plan is to develop processing sites, remove excess fire fuels from the forest, produce woody biomass pellets at those sites, transport the pellets to port by rail, and then export the pellets to the Asian markets that need it for energy generation. We intend We intend to enter into long-term agreements in these markets. Most of these agreements will be in the 10 to 15-year range. In some countries, it's more like spot markets with short-term contracts, but in some they're longer term, which is the ones that we will be most pursuing. As part of the process, we intend to contract for, fund, and perform the NEPA analysis as required. We will, of course, be working with the Forest Service in the completion of the NEPA analysis and the studies. We will also work with the Forest Service in the development of supplemental project agreements. And then we will contract for, with local providers, implementation of the treatment plans that are developed. We intend to contract with harvesters supporting both their businesses and ours. They will have long-term agreements so that they can plan ahead. We're even hoping that it get to the point that those contracts, maybe a 10-year agreement with annual modifiers, can be taken to the bank to assist them with capital that they might need for additional equipment and employees. So it would be a great rural economic development related function. We will then produce the pellets at the sites operated by GSNR and again fulfill the long-term offtake agreements via export. The U.S. Forest Service forests are currently our primary focus. However, biomass feedstock would also be obtained or received from other forested lands in cooperation with the state, private industry, private landowners, local efforts, and much more. For example, we've had a number of conversations with others that are very interested in what we're doing, and we can help with them being able to utilize their resources and extend the use of their resources by us taking biomass and us moving the excess biomass so that they're not having to deal with those expenses or deal with burn piles. We intend to cooperate and assist with fire safe councils, resource conservation districts, cooperatives, and others that are doing this work. We hope to further those efforts with others by being a partner and assisting them in the furtherance of their efforts and make it a win-win proposition. Very confident that we'll be able to do that. We've had discussions both at the state and the federal level about participating in the ingress-egress transportation route treatments so that when material that's non-commercial timber that comes to the landings needs to be removed or burned, they won't have to do that. We could do that, leaving more money for them to treat more road miles as an example. There are others that we've spoken with. We've had conversations with PG&E Vegetation Management that when they're doing their transportation corridor treatments, same kind of concept, it would benefit them as well. So there's a number of other ways that we can do this. We decrease the need for wood, burn piles, et cetera, and it provides for a number of other benefits. So we're attempting to look at this with a holistic view, considering how we can provide the most benefits possible within a successful business model. And again, I stated to you that we're a public purpose, public benefit focused organization. So we're considering how we can best achieve forest resiliency while at the same time assisting communities and providing for additional benefits. We have a number of plans in that regard. We've met with a number of the communities, including here in this area, and we feel very confident in our ability to be able to assist everybody in this and working together. Each site is planned to have cogen energy utilization. The intent to be that we would utilize all the biomass and that no waste would exist. Further, we can assist others with need in California. So when I mentioned that there's other sources of biomass, they wouldn't directly be out of our forest, but they're still beneficial to the state as a whole. We can take orchard wood waste. We can take clean landfill wood waste. It would help the state in regard to organic waste diversion and things of that nature. It all depends on the product mix and or for lack of a better term, the recipe of the pellets to make them meet all the standards as well as have the highest level of BTU generation to generate the most energy. I want to be clear, having said that there should be no concerns by any other parties. I want to be clear that we intend to work with and support all other efforts in the industry, forest health, and every other way that we can in that, from that angle. We also intend to do no harm, and I know this gets said a lot, but understand who we are and what we do and who we work for. We do not want to harm or negatively impact any other biomass facilities or any other related efforts. We don't want to impact existing jobs. We want to create new jobs. And so we want to be a partner and a support and not be a negative impact on anyone that is currently working in this effort. This is a large effort. We all know it is. We all need to work together. There need to be many parts of the solution to make this successful for all of us in our forests. We've made a fair amount of progress to date as we've pursued this. We're working through basically a full project development effort. Although we still have some hurdles in the process, we have already jumped many. Progress to date has been quite successful. So to date, among many other things, I just want to share with you some of the things that we've been able to achieve so far. We have assigned a 20-year master stewardship agreement with the Forest Service. The MSA includes all national forest, U.S. Forest Service national forests within California. I'm incredibly thankful both to the U.S. Forest Service in D.C. as well as Region 5 and forest supervisors who have been working with us to make this possible. We also have received tremendous support and assistance from them in a variety of other ways beyond a formal agreement. We have a handful of feasibility studies that we've already completed. We've completed feedstock assessments in a handful of different areas throughout the state. We've completed a feasibility study on producing and exporting wood pellets from California and a variety of different things that exist in that form. These studies that were performed have come back incredibly favorable and positive, very encouraging for us to continue in the effort. And in fact, in many cases, some of the assumptions we started with, we refined to make them a more conservative approach to make sure that we weren't just trying to make this look like better than it was. We wanted to be very realistic. And all of those, again, have come back very favorably. We also had completed a triple bottom line cost-benefit analysis by an international company that does it throughout the world in a variety of industries. They perform these on a number of areas, including life cycle costs, mitigated property damage, public safety, ecosystem benefits, reduced wildfire emissions, reduced firefighting costs, economic development and job creation, and life cycle assessment of carbon emissions of coal versus biomass, and studying the differences from harvest to combustion, both of coal and the biomass, including consideration that in Asia, the coal comes from much closer proximity than the biomass would from here in California. And even still, the differences are kind of mind-blowing in the amount of carbon that is reduced in that whole broad effort. Again, they demonstrate and they support multiple benefits to this project that are measurable, not just speculative, but they are all based off of peer-reviewed science and is very highly supported. The benefits are also resulting from successful, these benefits were derived in assessing only having 2 processing sites. So imagine the benefits if we have more. Many direct and indirect jobs would be created and would be very encouraging for rural California, as you can imagine. Again, I said before, we know that government funds are important. Again, trying to make sure that this is achieved through a way that is sustainable and ongoing and long-term. We are planning to do this primarily from the raising of private capital. I shared with you earlier that our organization participated in over $22 billion in capital finance. We plan on utilizing those skills. It'll be come in the form of both equity investment and long-term debt issuance, which we've done many times over the years. We've had a number of meetings and had very positive support from Undersecretary Hubbard, Chief Christensen, many of the forest supervisors and others in USDA and the Forest Service. Also here in Region 5, Randy and Barney and many of their staff have been incredibly supportive. We also have had conversations with everybody that we need to at the state, from Secretary Crowfoot and many others, Chief Porter, et cetera, all very supportive of what we're doing. I see that Jessica Morse is speaking here later today, and I think that's a great thing. I'm looking forward to that. So everyone that we've spoken with on the government side, as well as through the private industry side, have been very supportive to date. And I know that there'll still be a lot of other concerns as things happen and grow. The things that I'm sharing with you today are simply in the form of words. I just want to assure you that we are committed to being the type of partner that I've shared with you. So we have tremendous support from federal, state, and local government, as well as many others. But there's still much we know that needs to be completed to achieve forest resiliency, and it's going to take a long time. So we're saying that we intend to be part of the solution, providing a market-driven approach of removing excess fire fuels, producing a product, exporting that product, and permitting the effort to be ongoing. With success, it can be scaled. Everything is being modeled with a long-term view. Initially 2 sites, but then it can be scaled and grow to achieve more and more measurable results and benefit outcomes. As I shared with you, in the Asian market, they need multiple millions of tons of biomass pellets annually. And so that market will continue to grow over the next few years. And even when it flattens, it's still going to be a very significant market for long-term benefit. To achieve and succeed at a landscape scale treatment, and to make a real difference, we need to work with all stakeholders: private forest industry, state and federal government, counties and communities, the California Forestry Association, the Associated California Loggers, workforce development efforts, local cooperatives and organizations such as Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions, whom I'm meeting with here directly in just a few weeks. And we look forward to a number of other meetings that we have scheduled with more of those groups. We've met with a number of them, and we will continue doing so and make sure that there's open communication that is shared with everybody as we go. We know that the best results can be achieved by all of us working together, cooperating and assisting one another to make sure all of our businesses, all of our efforts are successful. Not only into the forest, but I know also everybody needs to have successful economic outcomes so that they can continue as well. The current plan, as I said, calls for 2 initial processing facilities. With success, we will scale and grow those to continue the benefit to our forests and communities. So in addition to the construction side of things and the production operations at each site, many rural jobs will be created. The local economies will benefit from direct and indirect jobs and activity throughout the entire supply chain. The number of jobs that came back utilizing the in-plan model by impact infrastructure demonstrated thousands of jobs, direct and indirect, being created throughout this. Just the number that come from 2 sites is very encouraging. So I want to be clear that we are not developing a pellet company. I've said to you this is a forest resiliency company. Rather, we're considering the development of the pellets to just be the first model or the first product that we produce. We're already expecting that at some point in some years from now, industrialized pellets will probably be considered obsolete or not the best renewable energy source and replace a coal. But that's not where we don't want this organization to end at that. So we are already working on the development of additional products. Rather than continuing to just talk about the problem, like most of you, we want to be part of the solution, not just now, but ongoing and long term. We want to be a partner long term with all of you to get our forests back to health, and we all know that that's going to take quite some time. So again, we're planning for the initial market that exists in woody pellets, and then additional products that we can utilize to be able to continue to treat. Part of our way of doing this, we're already exploring other products and considering in the design and development of facilities that we have flexibility to be able to make adjustments in the way that the feedstock is produced and other opportunities that are necessary to support other product development. We also plan to have innovation campuses at these locations where we can provide space and feedstock to those that are just really innovative and can come up with ideas that probably none of us are even thinking about today, and helping them develop new woody biomass products. Being able to do this would continue to support the forest resiliency industry as a whole, and then we can be a partner with them or a supplier or whatever is necessary so that their products and their programs can continue to develop and grow. And if the pellet industry goes away, or other industries that we're planning on utilizing, our markets, I should say, go away, then we can continue to be part of that and continue to be a forest resiliency company. Regarding potential sites, we've been evaluating potential sites throughout the state, throughout the forested portions of the state. We began looking at 180 some odd sites, and we've narrowed that down. We have made a decision that I'm really pleased to share with you today, that we're purchasing the Keystone site here in Tuolumne County from SPI. In fact, later on this afternoon, I'm signing the closing statements on that purchase. I want to publicly thank SPI for working with us. They've been very helpful through the process. We're excited about being able to utilize that facility. Also, additional sites are being assessed. We spent all this week up until late yesterday in the northern part of the state looking at multiple locations that could be part of this solution. In regard to timing, I know that all of you will agree, things never happen fast enough. It takes so long to get things done. However, we are anticipating that we would begin exporting pellets probably somewhere in the latter half of 2023. It almost pains me to say that because I wish we were doing it today, but it takes time to plan, permit, develop, et cetera, all those things that have to occur, ordering of equipment. We're working on a development calendar with a engineering firm to make that process as efficient as possible so everything's paralleled and not delayed on any other front. So we're doing the old Gantt chart and critical path and all those things that we need to do to make sure that timing is as efficient as possible. There are a number of others from the area that are providing assistance and support. I've had the fortune of meeting a handful of times with Supervisor Kuiken, who's been a wonderful resource in our efforts. I both appreciate his assistance today and look forward to working with him as we go forward on this effort. So we're working on it together. We look forward to the successful completion of the Cerro project, learning more about that and the innovation that many of you have been involved in that project. It's very exciting. We're hopeful and looking forward to it becoming a model that can be replicated throughout other parts of our state and as well as the country. We know that a lot of effort and a number of groups are involved in that, and we think it's absolutely perfect in the way to go, and we want to be part, not specifically of the Cerro project, but be part of your solution. So we have much hope in that and hoping that we can participate with you in its implementation and growth. I also want to thank the county, particularly Supervisor Brennan and Quincy Yaley. They've been incredibly helpful to us in this effort. Also, Cole Prisbilla has been, from the Economic Development Organization, has been very helpful. Also, I want to thank Mike and Randy and others at the Associated California Loggers. We've met with a couple of times, and we are learning from them. It's going to be very critical. The workforce development element of this is going to be a challenge, and we all need to work together to make sure that that's developed and we can have long-term assistance. Excited about, and we have met with a handful of different logging or harvesting firms, and they're excited about the opportunity of being part of this as well. And in developing that workforce with the loggers and it growing, it not only will be helpful to us, it should be helpful to the entire forest products industry as a whole, from commercial logging to all other factions, because it will create an additional workforce that has growth and flexibility in it to be able to help on many fronts. So we look forward to working with all of you, to supporting all of the efforts that are underway, having our efforts supported as well, and working on a win-win type of a circumstance. I want to assure you that, again, as I said at the beginning, who our organization is, we are committed to California and the state's forests and to being part of the solution, and look forward to working with you all on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. One thing I didn't make clear, we do have some time for questions from the audience, if there are any. We're not taking them from outer space, but we are able to take some here if there are any questions. Randy's got...
I got the mic over here.
Yeah, go ahead. And Randy might have one himself. So,
Actually, I do have a couple.
It scares me because he always asks me the hardest questions, so.
Oh, I'm going to give you softballs.
All right.
Like, when you do this, there's always obstacles, things that get in the way, and it's very encouraging that you're taking this on and helping things. But where do you see your major obstacles moving forward, regulatory or otherwise? And the real question, after you explain those, is, can we help? How can we help?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you know, we have dealt with a number of things already. And you know, when these things undergo, you plan as much as you can for hurdles and things that will come up, and you're always surprised. And so we know that we'll be dealing with those things and might be requesting help. But in regard to current obstacles, there are a number of things that we know that we'll face in performing the NEPA and CEQA process. And I failed to mention to you in my comments that we plan to fully fund, or maybe I did mention, I don't recall, but I want to emphasize, we will privately fund the NEPA and the CEQA performance, have it contracted for, and then work with the Forest Service on it being completed. We know that there will be opposition. We can utilize local community help, always would be beneficial in dealing with those circumstances. We intend for that process to be completely upfront, incredibly thorough, so it can be defended and stood up. Workforce development will be a big challenge, as I mentioned. So assistance in that arena through the Associated California Loggers, workforce development groups and organizations is another area where we could utilize help. And then we need to work with the local groups on developing further relationships in the community. We want to be open and upfront with the community. We want this to be something that is accepted and well received and encouraged. So working with all of you and others that are involved, as so many of you are, can be very beneficial in that effort.
Okay, another quick question. You mentioned in passing rail. Would you like to expand a little on how important rail is to your
Yes.
business model?
Incredibly important. So say, for example, here in this area, if we're successful in developing a facility, the design would call for up to 500,000 metric tons of industrialized wood pellets that would be completed. That means a lot of green wood coming in to develop that with the moisture content, et cetera. And so there will be trucks obviously bringing those in, but the rail is critical so that there's larger loads. I don't know that we'll get to manifest trains, but we plan on having a consistent path to the port. So rail is critical. We've met with Sierra Northern here. We also are working with BNSF and UP and other short line rail providers in different parts of the state. And so the rail volume will, the need for it to be consistent will be critical. We feel pretty confident in that. We've met with folks at the ports and talked to them about what they can receive. And for example, right now in the Port of Stockton, they're doing a, happened that we didn't realize they were, but they happened that they're doing an assessment of the rail and the capacity for rail at the port. And so we're providing them information on what we think our volumes might be so that they can include that into their plan. So the utilization of rail is critical. We don't want to have trucks of pellets going back and forth to the port. Rail is clearly the best benefit.
You mentioned the triple bottom line analysis. Can you expand on that?
Sure. Yeah, it was very interesting. It was one of the ones, I mean, I like all the other feasibility studies and such, but the triple bottom line cost benefit analysis, I don't know how familiar all of you are with those kind of things. I'm sure you are. When I first started hearing that, I just, you know, I'm a numbers person. I come from that side of the world, but, you know, when you hear these different terms like this, I started thinking it was just more buzzwords, but it is very beneficial and informative. We have looked at it from a number of perspectives. I'm trying to find my list again so I don't miss anything. I can share more with you, but we looked at, they did evaluation, like I said, of coal, like say into Japan, they get most of their coal out of Australia, and the cost and the emissions and everything associated with harvesting it in Australia, taking it to Japan, combusting it, and all the implications, versus harvesting biomass in California, exporting it to Japan, and a combustion there, comparing the costs associated with it, the emissions associated with it, the greenhouse gas implications, et cetera. Incredibly beneficial from a cost and a triple bottom line benefit for the social, economic, and environmental impacts, et cetera. We also assess that on when they use the, and I'm blanking on the term, the Forest Service model for fire, I'm just blanking on it, sorry. But anyway, they utilize that, working with folks from the Forest Service that the region introduced us to, and looking at when certain levels of treatment are performed, what it would do when the fire came through on the level of fire. So taking it from a catastrophic to a more reasonable or useful fire, and the amount of particulates and other emissions that were done. They even looked at the health impacts that are occurring with so many children that are getting asthma from some of these things and the implications of that, and healthcare costs and a number of other things that are part of that triple bottom line assessment. And it comes back incredibly favorable. And we were so encouraged in all these. The job creation, as I stated, is outstanding. The entire supply chain benefits and what it does for communities is tremendous. We were just in a community this week, and we ate at a small little grill, and they asked us what we were there for. And we just mentioned we're looking at a project potentially in this area. And they said, Guy, if you could even create 10 jobs, it would be outstanding. So we know how desperately that is needed. The assessment on the triple bottom line cost benefit analysis considered those types of factors as well, and again, comes back phenomenal. So we're really excited about what it can do in the broader scale of the public benefit and purpose. So those are some of the categories. There are others as well that all came back with quite a lot of encouraging news.
Greg, thanks. You're hitting this real well. A lot of questions, a lot of answers. One I thought you might be able to share is just the cost, the capital cost of one of these plants, and then maybe how many construction jobs and how many jobs at the plant that you
Okay.
foresee would
Sure,
be good to
thank
know.
you. Yes. On the capital scale, I'll give you a broad number. On the first two sites and what we would need to do in regard to capital infrastructure financing at the port will be somewhere in the realm of $320 to $350 million. And like I said, we would fund that through private capital, equity, and debt issuance. Our organization has a lot of experience with conduit debt issuance and other forms of private market capital growth. And so it would be in that realm. If we were to get to scale where we want to get, even though we're going to continue to put the funds back into developing it, we probably on the investment side will need to raise somewhere about 1.2 to 1.5 billion to get where we want to get. It would be more than double that would be utilized for capital growth, but it would have been the design and the way it looks like the return on investments and margins of workforce that we'd be able to be recycling or putting money back into it. In regard to jobs, on the construction jobs, Terrence, do you remember what that number was on a construction of one site? How many jobs? I've forgotten. Yeah, I think the number 560 direct and indirect jobs is in my mind. So it won't be 560 working on the site, but all the other elements that come from that. And then in operating a facility, like if it was a 500,000 nameplate facility with cogen, we're looking at 55 to 60 permanent jobs at a location like that. And again, multiples of other jobs in the supply chain.
Okay, I always have one more question. In private conversation, I don't think you mentioned this during your presentation. You generally talked about working with the Forest Service, but there's other, and you mentioned ag, but there's also some of the lower level lands that are oak woodlands. Is there any path there?
Sure. We know that, like, one of the things when I talked to Supervisor Kuiken before was about some of the other material here, the oak and such. The North State, there's a lot of juniper. I know that all you probably know this. I'm amazed by the fact that, like, when they remove a lot of junipers, shortly after that creeks and streams return. So it's incredible the volume of water that they impact. By the way, the water impacts is also part of the triple bottom line cost-benefit analysis. It is quite tremendous. So the idea would be that when we want to help in so many ways. We know that those species can also be part of the fire problem near communities, et cetera. And so we can take juniper, we can take oak that is permitted to be removed. Whether or not we utilize it in pellets is to be determined because there's other issues associated with, in particular, juniper. But we can utilize it in the cogen, high BTU use, et cetera. So we can remove other material like that can be beneficial to the broader community in our landscapes. So there'll be a lot of things like that we'll look at. Again, like the whole issue, in meeting with Secretary Ross at Food and Ag and talking about the orchard waste and the challenges that presents, and talking about folks in the solid waste industry and the landfills and dealing with clean green waste that they have to deal with, and in many cases they're paying to have it taken. There's a lot of things that we can do in that realm that would be beneficial either or both to the pellet production or to the cogen.
Okay, I got a couple more. Hey, I'm 10 minutes early.
You have to do that, Mike, because he'll keep going.
Okay, two quickies then. I'll give you both of them and you can decide how you answer them. I think they're quickies. GSNR is nonprofit.
It is.
And curious, because most people don't work in nonprofit. Private industry is a lot of this, and how that impacts your business plan. And the other one is, you mentioned long-term contracts with loggers even. What are we talking about, long-term contracts?
Okay. Yeah, I can answer both of those easily. The nonprofit side of it actually is quite beneficial because, we won't have shareholders that we need to be conscientious and pay. We will have investors, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to them that we will achieve, but we won't need to pay like dividends and such. Also, we have already received both federal and state tax exemption, so that would leave additional resources to be available to be able to return that to our efforts and to communities. So that would be quite beneficial. I do want to mention one other thing too on community benefit side, our sites will require high-speed broadband. When we bring that in, we plan on sharing access to that to communities and be an additional benefit. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second part? Oh, long-term contracts, yes. In Japan and South Korea, they really vary. They have different models of feed-in tariffs and different types of structures that they have to encourage this type of work. So in some countries, it's like I mentioned, it's only a spot market or maybe a 1 or 2 year agreement, which is hard to plan for. And so you would just enter into those if you had excess material. In some of the countries, they want 10 and 15-year agreements. And so on our end with the harvesters, what we'd want to do is the same thing. We'd want to match like 10-year agreements with the harvesters, for example. So we would have annual modifiers to volume and price, but they would know that we're committed to them and them to us, in addition to all the other work that they already do. So they could add crews, they could add equipment. In speaking to others about financing, we're pretty confident about their ability to be able to take that to their bank and be able to get resources or capital to buy more equipment, et cetera. And so there's multiple wins to be had in this. It'd be beneficial to all parties. Thank you all very much. Again, thank you for having us here.
That was really, really informative and well done, Greg. And it just reminds me of a project that started in this county in about 1980. And it was called the Ultra Power Biomass Power Plant. And it was 25 megawatts. And it was going to use 250,000 tons of wood. And the general consensus was, how is that ever going to work? No way, that can't happen. And from concept, in 1980, it was built. It was online in 1985, and it's been running ever since. And our county went through a planning process on that and gave it a negative declaration, welcomed it with open arms. I'm not sure all those great things will happen, because since then, it's gotten a little more complicated. I'll tell you this, in Tuolumne County, we tried to build a Lowe's department store, and that took 7 years to permit that. So I wish you much better luck than that, Greg. And I think you'll have better luck than that. So
I have to get back to sign for the escrow on that site.
would you please make sure and get there and sign that? Yeah.
I will do that. So I apologize for leaving,
No
and
problem.
we'll look forward to seeing everybody's recordings.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Okay. So next up, I'm real pleased to have our forest supervisor, Jason Kiken, with us. And he's gonna give us what's called a Cerro update. And I've had people ask me, what is the serial update? No, it's not serial. What is the surreal update? No, this is not surreal. This is the Cerro project, and he's going to tell you what that is. But let me first give you a quick introduction that Jason provided. And it goes like this. For the past 3 years, Jason has been the forest supervisor here on the Stanislaus National Forest. Prior to coming here, Jason was the deputy forest supervisor on the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest in Washington and a district ranger in northern Minnesota. In Washington, fires impacted many communities and landscape during his time there. These fires highlighted the need to use landscape level approaches to resource management. In addition, Jason works within the Risk Management Assistance Program for the Forest Service that uses analytical tools to identify priorities and develop strategies to protect those values. Seeing the demonstrated success of collaboratives on the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest and in Colorado, Jason is actively engaged with the Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions Collaborative. With YSS, they're helping demonstrate the power of shared stewardship to effectively increase the pace and scale of restoration. Utilizing a master stewardship agreement and common goals, YSS is preparing and implementing vegetation treatments that are protecting and enhancing our communities, infrastructure, and habitat for future generations. And I'll just make this comment that we really like Jason being here. He's young, he's energetic, and we're afraid he's going to get promoted out of here, so we do not want that to happen. So we want Jason to stay. So please, Jason, stick around if you will, because we really need people like Jason to pave the way. And he also wanted me to mention, he didn't put it in here, but he does have a wife and 2 children that are in school here, and great guy. Jason Kiken, welcome.
All right, well, thank you all. Thanks for being here today. Like Mike said, I'm Jason Kiken, and I'm honored to be the forest supervisor of the Stanislaus National Forest. It's been a quick 3 years. I arrived here just over 3 years ago. It was October. We'll never forget driving down. I had never really been to California before. With our boys, we had come to San Diego a couple years ago, or a couple years before we moved here. That was the first time I'd been to California. I am from Wisconsin originally, and I have to say it is good to be in the home state of this year's MVP and Super Bowl winner, Aaron Rodgers, but you know, because I'm a Packer fan till death. But I do want to go through a couple things, and I'm going to start with the Stanislaus, and what really makes the Stanislaus and Tuolumne County unique is the landscape, right? You have Sonora Pass, you have that amazing granite up there, you have places like Pinecrest that, well, tens of thousands of people come to every summer. It's quite the place. You have Yosemite National Park, which is a world-class destination. You have opportunities to go fishing in the Tuolumne. You have opportunities to go snowmobiling in some world-class places. And it's that uniqueness of the landscape that brings people here to live, to work, and to recreate. What makes this place special, though, are the people that inhabit it and come to it. That specialness really comes not just from that uniqueness that people are drawn to at the same time. It's the specialness of being able to say, hey, we all care about those same things, and how do we approach those problems that are impacting those places that we care about, and how do we create solutions? Because it's the solutions to the issues that we're seeing from insect and disease mortality, from drought mortality, and then from fire that brings us together and moves us all in one direction. And that's what Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions does. That's what TUCARE does. That's what the Highway 108 Fire Safe Council does, and other groups. We care about the same thing, and we're aimed at those same values. So that collaborative spirit, you know, it always starts a little bit slow, right? You have conversations around a table, and you have people trying to figure out where everybody stands. But over time, what we find in the collaborative group is that we, again, care about the same things. We care about communities. So Sonora, Twain Harte, Sugar Pine, Miwok, go up to Strawberry and go up to Pinecrest. All of these communities are at risk. And so what do we do about that risk? Well, we look at the landscape and we try to figure out how best to manage that landscape. Within that landscape, we have other things we care about. I mentioned those recreation opportunities, from hunting and fishing, from snowmobiling and hiking and camping. But we also have habitat, right? Habitat for California spotted owl. We have Pacific fisher in the broader area. We have Sierra Nevada red fox. We have a number of species that we care about. And so how do we balance all those things? And so I'm going to get back to that with the Cerro project, which Cerro stands for Social and Ecological Resilience Across the Landscape. So I'll get back to that, but I want to go back into my history for a moment to talk about why I'm here and why I care about what we're doing. And so, like I mentioned, I grew up in Wisconsin. I grew up on the banks of the Wisconsin River in a community called Wausau. You might recall Wausau Insurance commercials from years ago. That's where my dad worked a long time ago. And so growing up in Wisconsin, I spent a lot of time on the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in northern Wisconsin, the Ottawa National Forest, and Superior National Forest. But I spent almost every summer for a week or so, and then a lot of winters out in Colorado. I had an uncle that lived in Denver, and so I spent time on the Arapahoe-Roosevelt National Forest, the Pike and San Isabel National Forest, the White River. And in those experiences, I came to know and love the mountains, know and love the Forest Service, because these are areas that the Forest Service gets to manage. I did my Eagle Scout project on the Ottawa National Forest and Sylvania Wilderness area. And so that tie to the environment, that tie to the Forest Service and public lands is with me from being a kid. And so then I go on to school. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, so I stayed pretty close to home. Then my wife and I moved to Colorado. We're high school sweethearts, and we moved to Colorado, moved to Fort Collins. I had originally wanted to go to grad school at Colorado State. The professor I wanted to work under, he decided to retire, so then I had to come up with Plan B, and so we moved to New York City. But when I was in Fort Collins, got to spend more and more time in that Front Range, right? And that Front Range of Colorado was starting to change. You had the mountain pine beetle epidemic starting to go. That was early 2000s. So then we moved to New York City. Then we moved to Washington, D.C. I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Office of Budget and Program Analysis. I was the Forest Service analyst for a few years. And during that time as an analyst, I spent a lot of time on the issue of fire, wildland fire, and the cost. So in the late 1990s, fire accounted for about 16% of the Forest Service budget. You speed up to the mid-2000s, and it's gone into the 30% of our budget. And so we're talking about the precursors to what became the FLAME Act. Worked with the Office of Management and Budget every day about what is the cost of fire and what do we do about that cost and how does that relate to fuels treatment and landscape management. And yet being in DC, I didn't necessarily understand each component of what fire does on the landscape and how that economics isn't just the cost of wildland fire. So I go from there and get back to Colorado. I worked in the Region 2 regional office in Golden, Colorado, and mountain pine beetle had very dramatically changed what that landscape looked like. Even in the 4 years that I was gone, from early 2000s to now mid to late 2000s, it was very different. You could be on mountain passes, and as far as the eye could see were red trees, all dead. These were places that I cared dearly about, that I had spent time camping in, had gone hiking, had gone fishing in. And so I'm going to fast forward to just the last couple weeks, the Cameron Peak fire, the East Troublesome fire. Those are areas that, again, I know and love and spent time in. And here we are in late October, and fire is crossing the Continental Divide. That I used to go elk hunting first week in October, and would oftentimes get snow, right? And so things are changing. So what do we do about that change? And while I was in Region 2, saw the Front Range long-term stewardship contract get signed and started to be implemented. That was one of the first of its kind of a 10-year stewardship contract. I was able to go to some of the meetings on that and helped. I worked in budget and helped to execute some of those contracts and agreements and be able to see what collaboration is and what it does and what bringing a variety of interests to the table to help define what does that future look like and how do we move on that future collectively. And that was an important step in my development and my career path. I moved then from Colorado back to the Midwest. We had our first child and wanted to be closer to family. So we moved to Minnesota, and I was district ranger on the Chippewa National Forest at Deer River. And they don't have fire issues like we do in the West, but they do have some landscape issues. And so one day I was able to get up in a plane in spring and fly over the headwaters of the Mississippi River. You know, it's an amazing river system, and Lake Itasca was a matter of 40 miles west of where we lived, and that's the headwaters of the Mississippi River. So in this plane, we're flying over, and you see these stretches of river, the Mississippi and the Leech River, that are straight as an arrow for 5 or 10 miles, and you're kind of thinking, what's up with, you know, what's going on there, and where that those meadow systems that were straight had been straightened years ago in order to get water downstream faster to help with shipping. But what it had done was change how that system functioned and how water sat and flowed. And so then you would apply prescribed fire to make sure that those meadow systems would stay. And so I asked the question, why don't we just re-engage those meadow systems so that it provides other benefits and you don't have to put that fire down? And that had people scratching their heads. But now they're working on it. And the point of that too is that sometimes you have to get up in a plane or in a helicopter. You have to look at a different angle at the landscape we're looking at, because when we're on the ground, we tend to see just what's in front of us, right? We don't necessarily see what's beyond that next ridge. And so I'm going to put that mark down just for a second, because this isn't necessarily about water. It's not about the Mississippi River. So I went from there to the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest in north central Washington, lived in Wenatchee, and arrived in February of 2014. In July and August of 2014, we had the Carlton Complex fire, which was 1,000 acres smaller than the Rim fire. It impacted communities. It impacted areas that people that worked for the forest, as well as those communities had spent their careers working on and caring about and trying to improve. And here those areas were impacted now for the next 50, 60 years or more, hundreds of years in some cases. And that impact also impacted the economics of that area, because recreation and tourism, similar to Tuolumne County, is very important in Okanagan County. And so that again got me thinking about what is that larger conversation out there. How does fire and fuels, how does our landscape management connect with how we look at wildlife habitat? And they all connect. And what was beautiful there, as was wonderful in northern Minnesota, is I had a great relationship with Forest Service research. So Forest Service has some, well, I'll just say the best forest researchers in the world, from the Northern Research Station to Pacific Northwest Research Station to Rocky Mountain Research to Pacific Southwest Research Station, who I work with now. And through conversations with research, was able to look at fire history, to look at, well, how did these landscapes work, and how are they managed for millennia before we arrived and started altering how it changed, or how we now see the landscape. And with that, was able to start looking at models. So in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, they use this EMDS model that Paul Hesburgh and the forest had developed through this forest restoration strategy that was trying to lift us from that ground level view up into the sky, into being able to see for thousands of acres or tens of thousands of acres, how does the habitat in that landscape look now? How should it have looked in a natural range of variability? And how can we move back to that natural range of variability? Because these systems are built on fire. Fire has been a major component of these ecosystems for tens of thousands of years, and yet we've largely excluded fire. We've had other changes, but we can still do it. We can still mimic these natural processes through good silviculture through prescribed fire applied at the correct time in the correct place. And it's by working together. So go to 2015, and we had another terrible fire season on the Okanagan-Wenatchee with about 900,000 acres burn on or adjacent to the national forest. That's significant. That's a lot of acres. Those were more homes, more communities were directly impacted, more recreation sites were impacted. The biggest impact for me that year was had three of my employees get killed in the Twist River fire. That cut me deep. That cut the forest deep, because that's people. So all of these issues are resting upon each other. So again, the question is, what do we do about it? And up there, I was able to work with two main collaborative groups, the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative and the Tuppish Sustainable Forest Collaborative. And both of those collaboratives, again, brought those diverse interests together to talk about values that people care about. So then when I was looking around for that next position, because I was Deputy Forest Supervisor, the Stanislaus, it met those criteria. It met that criteria of being in the mountains, because I love mountains and always will. It met the criteria of having a collaborative group. It has two collaborative groups here. You have Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions as well as Amador Calaveras Consensus Group. And so I came with this hope that what can we do together? And you know what? Found it. Found that, and so I'm gonna stick to the Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions Collaborative Group because we're talking in Tuolumne County here. But when I arrived, there was this conversation of a master stewardship agreement with YSS, and we were able to get that across the finish line. So that's now signed with Tuolumne County. It's a 10-year MSA, and we do need to bump that up to the 20-year that we can now do. But that master stewardship agreement, we started laying the groundwork for working together, for funds going to Tuolumne County to do implementation of projects that were already through NEPA. We've now put a lot of money into that planning side, into getting. Well, actually, let me take one step back here, which is in all of those prior jobs, what I had a lot of conversations around were the hurdles to getting work done. We always talk about those things that stand in our way. And so to me, the question as well was, how do we identify those hurdles and get over them together? And that's what that master stewardship agreement is doing, is it found those hurdles, and some of those hurdles are surveys. Surveys tend to be one of those things that we don't always have surveys completed in order to get work done. So through this MSA, we've now pre-funded wildlife surveys, botanical surveys, archaeological surveys, as well as reflagging. We've been able to fund some road maintenance and reconstruction so that we can make those roads more accessible for all of the management that we need to do, as well as to be able to fund some implementation on the ground. All of those things are trying to identify that beginning to the end. And that is really exciting. And yet, what we were looking at for the first couple of years are implementing projects more on that 1 to 3,000 acre range. So 5-6 years ago, Congress gave us a new categorical exclusion that allows for up to 3,000 acres where there's insect and disease mortality. And we've been able to do a lot of fantastic work in the western United States with that authority. But it's not necessarily at that scale that we're trying to achieve. And so had conversations with YSS around how do we look at a larger landscape and be able to take those tenets of those conversations that we've had about areas that we trust each other and are working really well together, and how can we do that on a larger scale? And that's where this Cerro project came from, the social and ecological resilience across the landscape. So it's a 117,000 acre planting area. 92,000 acres of Cerro are National Forest System lands. But within that 117,000 acres, as well as really the whole forest, another thing we were able to do with YSS is acquire LiDAR for that entire forest, as well as state and private lands down to 1,500 feet in elevation in Tuolumne County, and that's a big deal. That was a significant win. And so what this project also is able to set up is how to make sure when we're doing treatments on the landscape that we're not stopping at boundaries. How do we encourage work on the other side of the boundary, onto those private lands, onto state lands adjacent to the forest? Because fire doesn't care who owns or manages the land. We need to work together in this all lands, all hands approach. And that's what we're able to do with YSS in what Cerro is really trying to set up and what that LiDAR acquisition is trying to set up. And so what Cerro is really trying to do is to use a number of these research tools, research that's been done just up the road in the Stanislaus Tuolumne Experimental Forest and other areas on how habitat and how landscapes used to look and what treatments can drive us back to that place. So we're using the quantitative wildfire risk assessment as well as potential wildland fire operational delineations or pods. We're putting that together with this Forest Service scenario planning tool, ForestX model that Alan Agar in Rocky Mountain Research Station put together, and Peter Stein and others are helping us meld all of those different pieces, all those different models together to be able to, again, look at this landscape as an entire landscape and fireshed, and how would fire impact the communities that we're seeing or that we have here? How does it impact that public infrastructure such as power lines? We have a wooden water flume that gives us water for, I think it's 90% of the communities in Tuolumne County that's gone through a valley. How would fire impact those recreation sites that I spoke earlier about, as well as the habitat that we care about? And so those models are trying to help us prioritize what acres are most at risk for wildland fire, and as well as be able to model out how large and what intensity those treatments need to be in order to reduce the risk to those things we care about. So again, recall that collaborative effort talks a lot about values, about that we all really care about the same things at the end of the day. And so these models are helping us say, yes, in fact, we do care about these things. Here's how much we care about them, and how do we make a distinct plan in order to protect those things we care about. And so the project, that social piece, is layering those assessments to be able to not only, again, identify the priorities and what work needs to be done, but also what habitat would remain and how best to benefit the habitat for those species we care about. The ecological part of Cerro, so the E in Cerro is really looking at that natural range of variability. So how do we lean into designation by prescription so that prescription, these landscapes didn't always have contiguous canopy cover. They had individuals, clumps, and openings, ICO. So habitat, because of small fires that used to come through, and there's a great program by Paul Hesberg that's Era of Megafire that really talks about how these systems used to function, and would recommend that we look at that sometime. But these systems would be different across the landscape. So you'd have areas of 1 to 5 acre openings. You'd have areas of 1 to 5 acre clumps, and then you'd have some areas that would be more contiguous. And that pattern across the landscape is something we're trying to reinform with this decision and do at a larger scale. So about 80% of the Cerro project area is outside, is highly departed from the natural range of variability, and we want to move that 80% back into a natural range of variability. Another component of this project is using the new California Spotted Owl Conservation Strategy. So leaning into what is that habitat for California spotted owl, what should it be, and how do we protect it? So being able to look at treatments within spotted owl packs as well as into territories in order to best protect those. And that modeling system is we're trying to identify, again, the highest priority habitat. Let's not only keep that, but let's also protect it by doing some treatments in and around that habitat, and that across the landscape piece is that state, private, as well as Forest Service lands, as well as BLM. We do have BLM lands here as well, but be able to work together in YSS and prioritize treatments, not just on Forest Service, but let's work together with the Fire Safe Council and others to implement projects on those state and private lands. And that's a significant thing. And then I'll also say at some point we will be challenged by unplanned fire, be it from a human-caused start, which account for about 95% of all of our fires in California, to a lightning-caused fire, which the 87 complex was really all lightning. But when you have those unplanned fires, what do you do? And we'll continue to do great initial attack. We were again successful very often here. But when we can't be successful in initial attack, what are those plans? And one of the pieces about the Cerro project and those potential wildland fire opportunity delineations is then we have what I'll call a pre-suppression plan. So we'll know what ridges, what roads, what rivers are most defensible, and those fuels treatments will be helping to strengthen each of those barriers that we can then rely upon when we have fire on the landscape. And so the treatments within Cerro that we're looking to promote are variable density thinning. So that's using the equipment that we saw in that video before, and let's do that at a larger scale, more quickly. Prescribed fire, because again, these landscapes are built on fire, but by and large, we need to do some mechanical treatment before we apply fire on the ground. And when we can do that well and correctly, we can increase the size of that burn unit. We can go from an average of 70 to 100 acres up to 500 acres or more. In certain areas on this forest, we can probably do multiple day burns in the 3,000 to 5,000 acre size or even larger. And that does put smoke in the air. And I know not all members of the community want smoke, but smoke will be a component of our landscape. And so how can we apply it on our own terms at less intense levels in the spring and fall? That's part of the conversation with prescribed fire. We'll also use mastication, invasive weed management, and then again lean into that California Spotted Owl Conservation Strategy to be able to do more work in all areas. And so there are challenges with all of this, but we can again get over those challenges and those hurdles by working together, by finding those commonalities in what we care about and what we're doing. But it has to be at the right size and scale. So in 2018, we had a couple of fires on this forest. The Ferguson fire that started on the Sierra came over to the Stanislaus and went into Yosemite National Park. And that fire as well impacted communities, landscapes, and economy. We had the Donnell fire that impacted over 50 recreation residences, a resort up Highway 108, and again, habitat, communities, economy. And what we found from that again is that resolve to work together to figure out how not to have fires impact this landscape. And so if we can hone in on those areas that we care about, that we have commonality, then we can pull back and be able to apply those treatments on a larger scale, because this is about scale. This is about treating, frankly, tens of thousands of acres on this forest alone every year is our goal out there. We've gone from treating about 7,000 acres a year as our 15-year average up to last year, fiscal year 20 was 15,000 acres. The year before was almost 30, and last year with COVID and everything, we had a number of other hurdles, but we want to get back into that 30 to 40 and even beyond 1,000 acres a year. And we can do that again by trusting each other, by working together to continue to refine the treatments that we're doing and to do them at scale. So the August complex, over 1 million acres. I mean, think about that for a moment. 1 million acres in California, and that is 2 years after the Mendocino complex was 452,000 acres in that same landscape. So that forest is dramatically changed, but that 1 million acres is, that's large. The Rim Fire, 256. What's the exact number, Randy? I know you know it. 257, 314. Okay, so that too was significant. Just this year in the Sierras alone, not counting the August complex, which isn't in the Sierras, we've had 2 fires bypass that, the Creek Fire and the North Complex. And so we need to get to scale. We need to be thoughtful and strategic in where we're applying limited resources. And so that's that model and that prioritization process, and about how do we look. And so what we're trying to do here, and so I'm part of a fantastic team. And when I say I'm part of a fantastic team, I'm not talking about folks that are only wearing the Forest Service shield. I'm talking about Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions. I'm talking about Tuolumne County. I'm talking about the residents in and around Tuolumne County that are paving the way for thinking about these problems differently, for coming up with innovative solutions, and are really leaning in, putting their own time, resources, and capacity into helping us cross that line, because we can do it. But we can only do it together when we're around that table and when we work together on that common goal. And so the Cerro project will have the draft EIS out here in a few months. We did have a scoping period that ended recently, and we're making changes to our proposed action, looking at some other alternatives. And so let's keep doing that. Let's keep working together. The Cerro project is the first step in that larger scale NEPA. We will do more, and we'll keep focusing on areas, and we will keep being innovative, but we'll be innovative together. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm okay. So happy to answer any questions, but let's get there together. So, good.
Thank you, Jason. How big was Cerro, you said?
Cerro is 117,000 acres, 92,000 are Forest Service managed lands.
Okay. Okay. How big is your forest?
898,200 and, I should know the exact number, but we'll call it 900,000 acres.
So it's a good beginning.
It's a good beginning.
What's next, and when do you start on that?
So what's next is let's get this document signed. Let's demonstrate success and build trust very quickly, and let's take that next step with what I'll call Cerro 2.0 without knowing what the name will or could be. But it's so we've identified a 250,000 acre area, of which Cerro is that northern portion. And I forgot to even speak to where Cerro is. If you're thinking about Cerro, it's on the north and west side of Highway 108 going up to the middle fork of the Stanislaus, in that rim just above that. And so it's a triangle then going up to Pinecrest, you could think. And so the 250,000 acre broader area is about an equivalent area on the south side of 108 plus some acres north and east of Pinecrest.
Okay, well, you started with my next question, is, and it's just in the understanding of thinking. Cerro is basically in the Stanislaus watershed.
Correct.
Why?
Oh, so that's a good question. I should have spoken to that. So why we chose the area was a collaborative effort as well. Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions. We had been looking at a project area larger than that, and based on some other conversations, we wanted to start smaller, and so. Yosemite Stanislaus Solutions was looking at about a 65,000 acre area that was done within that collaborative group. And so we had some conversations about, well, how about we go out to watershed boundaries, looking at hydrologic unit 6 codes. So it's the size of a watershed that generally a Huck 6 is about 10 to 15,000 acres in this area, and so we combined a bunch of 6-field watersheds into a larger area, and so that's how we came up with 117,000 acres, and then that 250,000 acres again goes to watersheds, really looking at how all of the drainage is what I'll call funnel fire. So if you had a really large fire of about 250,000 acres, where would that fire generally go in an area? And so that's how we came up with 250. But it was based on a collaborative spirit and collaboration with YSS. So great question.
Okay, and this is kind of the same question we asked Greg. Where are the obstacles in getting things done? And where do you need help? Where can we help you get it done?
Yeah, so those hurdles or those obstacles are things like surveys, like getting NEPA done, but also it's about strategy, conversation, and dialogue with people. And so we're trying to broach and get past some of those hurdles around surveys and NEPA. That's what Cerro and that MSA are doing. What we still need is that leaning in from organizations within YSS, and others should join that collaborative group. But we need time, talent, and people's minds and energy to help us resolve these issues, because there is nothing simple about the issues that we face. We're trying to layer and address everyone's values into one document on a piece of land, and that's a challenge. But when we can work together, and by work together, that's also working on our own land if we own private land, but it's about being able and willing to accept some innovation and be able to correct when that doesn't go exactly as we planned. It means being willing to accept prescribed fire and the smoke that comes with it so that we can avoid larger fires into the future. And it comes into what was just being talked about by Greg Norton in how do we come together and have industries that can utilize material that can change economics of timber sales and biomass so that we can get more work done with the funds that we have, and then be able to lean into those wonderful authorities that Congress has granted us, and that as an agency we've written regulations for, so that we can try those new and innovative approaches like stewardship contracting, like designation by prescription, designation by description, but being able to go out and being willing to go out on a field trip and talk about what's working really well, what's not, and when it's not, how do we correct it so that we can do better in the future.
I got one more for you, and then I'll give it to you, Mike. I know that you had a lot of comments on the Cerro project. Mm-hmm. I saw some of those. Most of those were pretty positive. Were there any gotchas in those comments?
So there are a variety of perspectives on Cerro, but we will continue to work with individuals that don't necessarily see the same need for treatment at the same scale, and yet it's through that work with YSS that if we can have a main body that can help spread the message of what are we doing, why are we doing it, what are those values that we care about, and how does this document help promote and sustain those values, then we'll be okay. All right. Good. Thank you very much. All right. Really appreciate it. Very good.
Okay. Are we queued up okay to Sacramento, as far as you know? Okay. Got my glasses or somewhere. What'd I do? Okay, our next speaker is joining us from Sacramento, and she will be on the screen here. And we're very, very fortunate to have Jessica Morse willing to join us today. And I'm going to she's provided this introduction, which I'll read, and then we'll get her going. Jessica Morse is the Deputy Secretary for Forest Resources Management at the California Natural Resources Agency. In her role, she is working to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration and emergency fuel breaks throughout California. Prior to joining the Newsom administration, I'll tell you, this is very interesting what I'm about to read you. Prior to joining the Newsom administration, Jessica spent nearly 10 years in national security working for the Defense Department, State Department, and U.S. Agency for the International Development. Her assignments included a year and a half in Baghdad, Iraq, as well as India, Myanmar, and the U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii. Throughout her career, she designed and executed innovative strategies across agencies and governments, including a strategy using renewable energy technology transfer as a catalyst for improving U.S. defense engagement with India. Jessica is a fifth-generation Northern Californian. She and her family still own their original homestead, forest land near Tahoe. Her Sierra roots translated into a deep love of the outdoors. Jessica can be found backpacking, skiing, and fishing throughout the Sierra. She even hiked 500 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. Ms. Moores holds a Master's of Public Affairs from Princeton University and a Bachelor's of Arts in Economics from Principia College. In 2008, Jessica ran for Congress in the 4th District of California. Jessica, you are there. Hi, welcome to our summit, and it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here and excited to be with all of you today. And it's a really exciting moment where we are at a turning point in California's history. I know it's been a really tough fire season for everyone, and a lot of you have dropped everything to be on the front lines of it and have kept your community safe. Tuolumne County really rose to the occasion with some fires that you had here in 2020 when fire resources and suppression equipment was stretched thin across the state. We had 5 of the 10 largest fires in state history burning simultaneously in the months of August and September. So the scale of this crisis is unprecedented. As all of you know, we've had over 4 million acres burn this year. And just as a point of comparison, last year we had 277,000 acres burn. And so this is an unprecedented scale of crisis, and it is one that is demanding all of our attention, and all of you are on the front lines of this and are ahead of the curve here. Tuolumne County is incredibly impressive because of some of the thoughtful work that we've just heard described through YSS and the community, where they are taking a comprehensive forest resilience approach to restore the rimfire, but also have that benefit the economy and community, as well as the local ecology and fire resilience. Often I like to start, I know we have an audience of folks who really understand forests pretty well, but I know that there's a lot of people tuning in who may not have that foundation. So I want to give just a quick overview of how we got to this crisis point in California's forest health. And as many of you know that Native Americans managed our forests for millennia through prescribed fire. We have fire adapted ecologies throughout most of the state. And then colonialism brought a legacy of fire suppression, gold rush era, clear cutting, removed much of the old growth out of California. And then our forests grew back overly dense. And a part of this history that is not as well known is the politics behind the nascent Forest Service. And there was a clear understanding of, by Gifford Pinchot and some of the founders of the Forest Service, that we had fire adapted ecologies in the West and fire was a critical tool. However, the concept of public lands was so controversial in that day that when the Forest Service was founded, Congress refused to fund it. And so in order to be able to get funding to be able to preserve the existence of the Forest Service and this concept of public land, Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot made a trade-off. They decided to frame the Forest Service as a fire suppression agency because that is what would give Congress the political interest in sustaining the Forest Service. And so they traded off their knowledge of the ecology to be able to meet the politics of the day. And now, 100 years later, we are now paying the price for some of those decisions because, as all of you know, our forests are out of balance, that we need to actively manage them. We need to be able to thin them and restore them to be able to gain the level of resilience. The last few years, we are seeing now, as century of forest management practices collide with climate change. And as we're watching our fire seasons get longer, our forests get drier, we are seeing these two factors come together to give us these explosive acres and devastating impacts that we've seen. The Creek Fire just to your south is a really clear example of this, where you're seeing cascading climate events colliding with forest density and forest health. So we had a 1,000-year drought, as many of you know, with the bark beetle pandemic. Warmer winters didn't arrest the bark beetle. The trees were stressed. They couldn't push them out. And that 1 in 1,000-year drought that we had from 2012 to 2015 killed 163 million trees in our forests. Most of that, a lot of that density was highly focused around the Southern Sierra. And so what we saw was the creek fire. As a result, we had a heat wave on top of that in August, where we recorded one of the hottest temperatures on the planet, 130 degrees in Death Valley. And that dried out our forest fuel from, down to about 6% fuel moisture. And as many of you know, kiln dried wood is 10 to 12% fuel moisture. So our forests were dry. But what was different about the creek fire and this fire in a beetle kill area is that it was the forest structure. Because when you had this high tree mortality, where 80 to 90% of the trees were lost in that region around Shaver Lake, that the beetles kill larger and target the larger, older growth, wider diameter trees. Our fuel models are based around 3-inch diameter wood when we're predicting the analytics of how a fire behaves. We're assuming that it is smaller wood and flashier fuels that are driving a fuel-driven fire. In the creek fire, what we saw were wide diameter trees on the ground in high density driving that flame. And so when you had an ignition, because again, this is the first year that you're seeing a lot of those trees, about half of those trees fallen down before they had been standing. And so now they are ground fuel and ladder fuel for a catastrophic fire. And so with the creek fire, we saw a phenomenon called standing combustion, where that fire had so much fuel and was burning so hot that it mimicked something that hadn't been seen since the Tokyo fire bombings. That scientists who study this phenomena of standing combustion, having an active flame throughout an entire footprint of a fire rather than having smoldering in the middle and flames on the edges, which is more of the model that we have historically seen in California, that standing combustion was something that you typically only have seen at Tokyo fire bombings and catastrophic war zone conditions. And so we had that around Shaver Lake, Huntington Lake here in California in September. And that is where you then see this cascading impact, where the fire, that flame was so hot and that fire was so hot, it had created that pyrocumulonimbus cloud that we saw that went up 50,000 feet in the air and then frequently and collapsed a number of times on firefighters and communities on the ground. And it has, when those pillars collapse, it creates a splat impact, if you can envision that, where it sends out 60-mile-an-hour winds in all directions. And I know that some of you we're on the ground for that. We're on the front lines of that. And those fire conditions are incredibly terrifying and unpredictable and difficult to anticipate where that fire is moving, how it's going to behave, how to evacuate a community. And so when you get a phenomena with that much fuel load on the landscape, it's catastrophic. One example, though, stands out when you look at Shaver Lake area. You had actively managed forest lands by Southern California Edison. They had been managing there, thinning the forest, had a better density. It met Mike Albrecht's standard of you can ride a horse through it. And they'd been managing it with thinning and prescribed fire for the last 50 years. And as a result, they not only had better conditions in this fire, but they also had better conditions because in the beetle kill, their trees were less stressed on that actively managed land and sustainably managed land. And so they had about 25% loss of tree mortality, whereas land that had not been as actively managed by the Forest Service right along the same ridge line had about 80 to 90% of tree mortality. And as a result, on the unmanaged areas, you had catastrophic fire. When the fire hit the Southern California Edison actively managed land, it laid down and behaved much more like an ecological fire that we want to see in California. And so it really brings us back to this point that our forests are out of balance, that we need to be able to create systems to establish this resilience, the crisis is becoming exponentially more urgent because the forest density and the forest management is now meeting the urgency of climate change that we are facing with our weather conditions. Now, there's some good news to this story. We do know that our forest ecology, when they are resilient and strong forests, healthy forests, can actually handle rising temperatures effectively. So I'm going to have the audience, I can't actually hear any of you, I have to confess, but I'm going to just, for those of you in the audience or at home, I want you to take a wild guess as to, or your best guess as to where you think this forest that is behind me is located geographically. Where do you think it is? Can you see it? Just shout it out to your neighbors. I want you guys to have some friends. All right. So I'm guessing some of you thought Sierra, parts of California. This is actually Baja California. This is an active pine forest down in Baja California, and it really demonstrates forest resilience in a warmer climate area. And this forest was untouched by human intervention. It was managed by lightning, so the old growth remained. It was managed by fire naturally over the decades and has continued to be managed through prescribed fire over the years. And so it has that nice mix of tree ages and so it's a healthy forest in a warmer climate. And so the question we have to face is, how do we achieve fire resilience in California? How do we return to this more natural stand that our ecology is adapted to and that we know can endure the rising temperatures that we are facing? And so I'm going to take a moment to really talk through the layers of fire resilience in California. How do we live in this environment of climate change? And how do our communities, our economies, and our ecologies survive and thrive in more intense conditions that we are facing? Fire resilience in California really comes on 3 layers, which I think of as simultaneous fronts that we manage at the same time. And you can think of them as like 3 pillars of a stool. And if you knock one down, you lose them all. So the first layer is really the community. That's how do we make sure that our communities survive when there are catastrophic fires. So many of you have had to evacuate during fires, have lost homes or had friends who lost homes, have taken relatives who have evacuated, have stood on the front lines of fire recovery. So the question is, well, it's never easy to have a fire come through. Is there a way we can have our communities stand and recover better and create more survivable spaces in our communities when there is a catastrophic fire? So that front is looking at defensible space zones. We've just updated laws to now include 5-foot area of non-flammable material around any individual home to be able to create that defensible space zone so that you don't have shrubs up against your house or wood pile. I still know some people keep wood piles next to their house. Come on, guys. And so that there's not a flammable front that would be touching or close to your house or could break your windows in a fire. And then we also have home hardening techniques. We updated state fire codes in 2008 and building codes to incorporate higher standards. And so we saw in Paradise that the buildings that had been built to the higher fire code had about a 50 to 60% survival rate in the campfire, and the older homes had about a 10% survival rate. So now CAL FIRE has put out a list of home hardening retrofits to be able to help homeowners do low-cost things such as change their windows or change the vents on their attics so that they are essentially ember-resistant houses in high fire risk zones. Because 1 in 4 Californians live in a high fire risk zone. It is not just our rural communities. So that's when we're talking about that community survivability, making sure we have evacuation routes, that your homes have defensible space around them, and that we have made the updates to our homes to be more fire resilient. And so that will increase our chances of surviving a catastrophic wildfire. The next rung on the stool is, or the next leg on the stool is the wildland-urban interface. That's where we try to prevent the fire from coming into the community in the first place. This is where we put out strategic fuel breaks, where we create defensible lines and have hardened roads so that we have evacuation routes in the case of a catastrophic fire. And we saw SPI, for example, put in a strategic fuel break around outside of Paradise, and it self-arrested the flank of that campfire in 2018, and it saved the town of Sterling City. 8-mile wide fuel break, 8-mile long fuel break. The governor's first act when he came into office was to declare a state of emergency before the emergency. He deployed the National Guard and waived CEQA and other regulations so that we could establish emergency fuel breaks throughout the state at an expedited pace. We were able to achieve those, almost all of them within the first year, and many of them came into play during this fire season. For example, around Shaver Lake, there was a strategic fuel break put in outside of the town of Toll House that allowed firefighters to be able to hold that line and protect the town during the creek fire. So we've seen these come into play in action all over the place. And what's really helpful, you know, when we're talking about how do we get this partnership between public safety and the timber operators and environmental groups, that we see this come into play a lot during fuel breaks. CAL FIRE has partnered with the California Native Plant Society, and outside of Colfax, for example, they designed a strategic fuel break hand in hand with the Native Plant Society. They did it fast, and now that fuel break is germinating morning glory and milkweed and is monarch butterfly habitat, as well as a key tool in community safety. So you know, there are really clear examples of models of partnerships that help things go quickly and safely for our community. So then we've talked about that community layer. We've talked about the wildland urban interface to be able to make that stand on those fuel breaks throughout the state. And then the last layer is the landscape. And that's really what we'll focus on today in depth. And that is asking ourselves, how do we get these resilient forests, like the one you see behind me? How do we get a forest that is going to be resilient to fire? How do we get our landscapes to be recovered? We know that when we have 4 million acres burned this year, there's, it's on some of these fire footprints, the reports are coming in, some of them are 50% high severity burns, which means that we're gonna get cascading impacts from that. So for example, we'll have potential runoff and sediment buildup causing flooding down the line. The soil is no longer able to retain water the way it should, and so we end up with exacerbating drought conditions down the line because the Sierra itself and the land itself is not functioning as the reservoir it's supposed to be. We end up with vegetation type change conversion. So when areas like we saw in the Rim Fire, when they convert from conifer forest to shrublands, you lose not only the habitat and the biodiversity, and California is one of 6 biodiversity hotspots on the globe. Our habitat is remarkable and is a global treasure that we need to protect. So when we have these catastrophic fires, we lose that biodiversity, but we also lose the carbon storage potential of having what we call stable carbon storage by promoting wider, bigger trees. And so there's a lot of cascading impacts that then further exacerbate the environmental challenges than the public safety challenges that come from those for our community when we don't do the restoration after a fire and when we don't prevent the catastrophic fires. So how do we get to sustained landscapes and to safe landscapes in California and to restore the resilience of our forests? So there's 2 layers. There's a commercial layer to this and a non-commercial layer. So the approach on the non-commercial sector, where you don't have merchantable wood coming off of a project, that is really focused on some tools that we've created to help expedite the process. So this year, the Board of Forestry certified the CalVTP. So that's the California Vegetation Treatment Program Environmental Impact Review. It's essentially it takes the CEQA process from 2 years down to about 3 months. It still requires a ground survey, a forester to get out on the ground and analyze what equities are there, but then that's it. because what this document did is it took 20 million acres of non-federal land in California, and it did a pre-environmental review. So it did the legwork. And so now when you have a project that is doing vegetation treatment, reforestation, ecological recovery in these high severity burn areas and high risk burn areas, then you can actually do your CEQA very quickly. And it's a much faster process, and it's on the ground now. We have projects starting under it. And so it's, you know, it's a tool to actually expedite our pace and scale on this landscape health work. Another tool that we have in place is really looking at trying to build up partnerships. So we have the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program, which is designed to, it has placed watershed coordinators in key watersheds throughout the state. And their goal is to be able to come up with, despite sort of multivaried land ownership across a watershed, a cohesive plan to actually move that forward. And so we're really focused on making sure that we have coordinated plans, the planning is done, the projects are moving forward, and that we are then able to have a contiguous approach on the landscape. Another effort we're doing is to make sure we are improving our data. I mean, we've heard YSS using LiDAR. As many of you know, our state budget kind of turned upside down on its head in May, but when we had proposed about 80 million for statewide LiDAR in the governor's 2010 or 2020 budget. But when we went from a $20 billion surplus in our state budget to a $52 billion deficit because of COVID overnight, our $2.5 billion in forest health activities had to be taken out. And so what we are now doing is looking at what data sets we have in the state and what tools we have to be able to get us that more resilient approach. But because when it comes to the LiDAR and the imaging data, being able to have a consistent tool and data that underlies those consistent tools is going to be really crucial to effective planning throughout the state. I want to talk a little bit about some of the hurdles we're facing on the landscape approach as well, because we have efforts underway to mitigate those hurdles, but they need to be scaled up to the scale of the crisis. So, for example, one of the hurdles we have to really reach that contiguous, healthy landscape is support for small forest landowners. That 25% of California's forest lands are owned by small family landowners, like my own family, who are cash rich or who are land rich, cash poor, and therefore it's really they're in a tough spot where it's difficult to pay to actively manage forest land. A lot of families can barely keep up with the taxes. And what we see across the nation is that small family forest landowners are selling their properties at pretty high rates. And especially they tend to sell when there's a health crisis. So we're looking at a potential of a lot of small family forest landowners selling their forest land. And in California, when they sell it, it gets converted to housing, which is high fire risk housing, or cannabis. And so we really want to work to try to preserve that forest land. We have the California Forest Improvement Program, which provides technical expertise and support to help small family landowners make a plan. But there's a need to really expand that effort and also create markets so that we have more micro mills and mobile mills that are able to go around and be able to remove any merchantable wood off of these small family forest landowners in an efficient way so that they can help recoup some costs. Another big challenge we have that we've heard a lot about today already is the woody biomass challenge. And so when we're doing our thinning projects that we end up with these slash piles that are the size of strip malls. And so in the Tahoe Basin alone, there's 40,000 slash piles sitting there. And so these become big challenges during a fire, and often they are just pile burned in the winter. And and it means that the carbon emission is just released into the atmosphere. And so when it comes to woody biomass utilization, what can we do that is better than a wildfire and better than pile burning it and having the emissions from that? And you've already heard from RCRC and Greg Norton today about the pellet project they have and about traditional biomass energy. And you know, there's a lot of innovation also in this sector. The California Board of Forestry has the Joint Wood Products Innovation Institute, and they are looking at different technologies that can actually help utilize and identifying where the market barriers are for those technologies that will utilize woody biomass at scale in California, so that we have a robust market for this, so that we are not paying to release black carbon into the atmosphere. And so some of those innovations are very exciting. It's things like diesel fuel and diesel fuel replacements, replacing jet fuel, and when you have slightly wider diameter wood, potentially cross-laminated timber is looking at different sizes that it can use. So really looking at traditional and non-traditional wood markets of how do we expand them here in California? How do we find better and higher uses for this, what otherwise is considered forest waste material? And it's especially prescient because we are facing 4 million acres burned, which means millions and millions of hazard trees that will need to be removed. And the option for most of those right now is to be landfilled. So we need to be able to find better uses for this material. Cross-laminated timber is a very exciting technology that we are trying to bring to California. We just changed California's building standard codes in July to allow now up to 18 stories made out of cross-laminated timber, which basically takes potentially smaller diameter wood, right, or functions off of 2x4s right now, but it laminates that wood together and creates a steel, a replacement for steel and concrete when it comes to buildings. And one of the barriers to companies coming here was California's regulatory environment, and so we have shifted that to be able to be welcoming for cross-laminated timber, and we hope that that's going to be a great way to utilize some of our excess wood. Now, some of the other challenges that all of you are encountering, especially on the commercial side of timber harvest in California, is the infrastructure capacity that we, as Mike pointed out at the beginning, we don't have we don't have a lot of mills left in California. And we have shortages in the workforce across this sector, from traditional loggers down to the vegetation crews to foresters to plan and execute projects. So this entire sector is needing support in workforce development and in expanding access to equipment and capital. So on the access to capital front, one of the areas we have been exploring is we had proposed in the January budget publicly a climate catalyst fund, which would have been a zero interest revolving loan fund that would have given zero risk loans to anyone starting up in the woody biomass industry or even the traditional forest sector, so that we can get more equipment and tools on the ground to be able to increase our pace and scale of forest resilience across the state. That obviously went out the window with the budget, but I think that concept is still in exploration, and one worth all of you really leaning into, because what we have heard consistently is that it is incredibly hard to get loans because rural banks are rare and commercial banks are not well established for small businesses in the forestry sector. So we want to overcome that barrier so that we can get more small businesses started in this sector. And then another challenge on the commercial side is feedstock supply confidence. The Forest Service has done some great work with long-term stewardship agreements, like the one with RCRC, to be able to create that feedstock supply confidence enough to be able to establish businesses. But California functions, we don't own most of our land, obviously, that we do work on, and so we cannot just offer sort of supply contracts from the projects we're doing. So we are trying to find innovative proposals and ways to be able to create a marketable, that market confidence that we know that there is going to be woody biomass and merchantable wood coming out of this particular wood basket for the next 10 years, so that somebody can kind of take that confidence to the bank and set up the industry around it that's needed to be able to find better and higher utilizations of that wood waste than just pile burning it. And the last challenge that we're really facing in this market sector is around the salvage logging and the salvage wood. As many of you know, we have a lot of exemptions and emergencies to really speed up the process when it's time to do, when it's either you're doing beetle kill or hazard tree removal or post-fire salvage. CAL FIRE has those permits down to 1 to 5 day turnaround on them. Even our traditional timber harvest plan permits are down to a 3-month median time turnaround for a CEQA equivalent document, which again, CEQA usually takes 2 years. So we're trying to create efficiencies in that sector. Not as efficient as an emergency exemption, but it's trending in the right direction at least. And we now have those permits accessible online so that it's easy for everyone to be able to have a one-stop shop to be able to get your timber harvest exemptions and emergencies online. And so when we're in this process, we're trying to make the bureaucracy faster and more efficient without losing the environmental quality that California is known for, because the environment, as we're seeing, is so stressed and sensitive that we have to be able to make sure that we get it right. And many of you operating at large scale always do. And it's really trying to support small landowners and new operators to be able to reach those consistent standards. So one of the other points, though, I want to make in the emergency crisis that we're in right now with the 4 million acres burned, and part of the reason I was bringing up the lack of infrastructure is that we really feel it right now because, for example, in Santa Cruz, they have thousands of trees coming out that are redwood and Doug fir that were burned in the fire. These are all commodity wood, but there's no mill capacity for that wood. And so instead, landowners are going to have to pay to have commodity wood chipped and shipped to a landfill in Lovelock, Nevada, where that carbon gets released. So that doesn't meet any of our state carbon goals. What would be better is to be able to have a mobile mill or a mill capacity set up nearby and to be able to process that burnt timber, and then to be able to put it into housing where that carbon is then stored. So both our economic and ecological goals are met when we find ways to sequester and store that carbon rather than landfilling it. And so there's a lot of conversations happening right now around creative and innovative thinking about how we create a fast infrastructure, or how we look at storing and preserving potentially burnt logs and while they wait for mill capacity. So I think there's a lot of innovation in this area, and we're really eager to hear your ideas and suggestions of how we as the state can support finding higher alternatives for what otherwise would get landfilled or burned wood. So that gives you a really broad overview of and a sample of some of the activities and projects we have underway, from data gathering to better planning to trying to improve the regulatory environment to really dramatically increasing our pace and scale. And all of you who are on the ground on the environmental side and with businesses in this area, you make a big impact. California has set out a target of 500,000 acres a year for our pace and scale of hitting our targets to be able to restore forest health. And we're going off of, there's 15 million acres in California that are in need of treatment. So we're trying to hit 500,000 acres a year. This last year we did 390,000 acres, which is a scale up from what we did before. But just so you have a sense of it, about 300,000 of those acres were commercial timber operations or operators, who were using exemptions, emergencies, doing fuel reduction work and thinning forests through a market mechanism. And 90,000 acres were the work that CAL FIRE is doing and our forest health grants to do those efforts. So we don't, and there was a built-in assumption on the 500,000 acre target, which was about 250 to 300,000 would be natural working lands, would be that commercial timber side. And so having that sector function really effectively is crucial to the entire landscape of California's forest health. Just like we saw with Southern California Edison, that actively managed private forest land functioned a lot better than land that had not been managed, and was better for community safety and was better for our ecology. So while we work actively on the ecological side and the recovery side, we really need to make sure that private forest land has all of the tools it needs to be actively managed so that we can have a resilient forest, so that we don't make the mistakes of Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot years ago, where they made a trade-off for the politics of the day, and they tried to mold their policies into the politics of the day rather than letting it be guided by the ecology, and it created a problem for us a century later. So we have the tools in place and we have the collaboration in place to be able to make the right decisions that will give us a forest that looks a little closer to this, where we have, where generations from now will look back on us and say they did it right, that we actually established resilient forests and saved California's ecologies and communities that are so dependent on healthy forests, even in the face of climate change in our state. So I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. I'm happy to take questions. Ryan here tells me he's got a way for us to do it, and excited to hear what you're thinking about.
Okay, Jessica, thank you. I don't know, can you hear me? Yeah, you can. Okay, you're getting applause. I don't know if you could hear that. So that was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I think, Randy, does the audience have anything, or?
Yes, sir. We have a couple of questions.
Okay, we got a couple
First,
of
I want to
questions,
thank Jessica for being here and going through all the trials and tribulations of having to last minute move to a remote location. So we're glad you were able to work all that out. A couple of issues that I'd like to have your thoughts on for all of us is we burned 4 million acres this year. You said that. And 4 million acres is about 4% of the state of California. And I don't know how much of that was forest land, but if we burned 1 million acres of forest land, that's 3% of our forest land. And in the last few years, we've been burning a lot of our forest land with pretty high intensity. We haven't been restoring that, and I'm a little concerned about that. And what your thoughts are about maybe we need not only a healthy forest task force that's dealing with our existing forests, as long as we have them, but maybe we ought to have something going on our burned area restoration.
Yeah, Brandy, thanks for asking. And let's see, I don't know if I heard your entire question, but let me see if I can summarize it, and that's what I'll answer. So, I mean, you were asking about the 4 million acres burned this year, and what is the plan for the ecological recovery and the recovery of those landscapes? So, yes, I mean, it is catastrophic. I mean, before this year, we had an average in the last decade of about 800,000 acres a year burning in California. And remember, not all of that is high severity. You know, we want people to get acclimatized to having more acres of healthy burns in California rather than catastrophic fires that we're seeing right now. And so, yeah, one of the challenge of having 4 million acres burn at once is that the impact of not restoring it is really catastrophic across multiple watersheds, ecologies. I was telling you about the cascading impacts. But I mean, everything from mudslides to the loss of habitat to the loss of watershed exacerbating our drought is really devastating. The challenge we're facing is candidly a resource challenge, that when we have, our budget disappeared in 2020 because of COVID. And our forest health funding comes from the greenhouse gas reduction funds, the cap and trade auctions. We had a $25 million auction in May when they're usually $700 million. So the revenue coming in that we rely on is really challenging. And as you know, California can't issue debt. And so that's where the federal partnerships are so crucial. We just signed the shared stewardship agreement with the U.S. Forest Service in August, which really lays out kind of this comprehensive strategy of that I was talking about, of improving timber harvest, improving data, having a more contiguous approach to coordination, focusing on woody biomass, investing in workforce development. It really lays out that whole structure. But one of the areas where we need a lot of help and partnership is really on finding the resources to recover these dollars. We're in conversations with OES, Cal OES, and FEMA about how we can use some of the FEMA dollars to be able to restore landscapes. That on the rim fire, you won Tuolumne County won the HUD grant to do the recovery work. But as we all know, that if you wait multiple years to start the recovery, you lose the potential of sequestering the carbon in the timber that you could have had merchantable timber that could have been sequestered there. So you lose that. You lose the habitat. Sometimes the shrubs come back really fast, and so then you have to then remove shrubs to be able to give conifer forests a fighting chance. And so it gets more expensive and more complicated the longer you wait. But yeah, out of 4 million acres, if only 1 million acres were a high severity burn, so if only a quarter of it was a high severity burn in need of recovery, we're looking at $1 billion just to recover from this year. So there's a huge effort underway to be able to help us achieve that, but it's a resource constraint, and that's where sort of all of your advocacy work to really try to bring in federal dollars to be able to do this is so crucial, because we are facing a scale that is unprecedented, and therefore the impact down the line, years to come, will be unprecedented if we do not intervene now to restore this ecology.
Okay, I just want to make one quick comment. I don't want you to answer this because we're running out of time, but this is really a good, healthy discussion. But just a thought, and then I'm going to turn it back to Mike. Not only do we have a problem with this burned area in terms of restoring it, but over the years, we've had this, I think you said 850,000 roughly acres a year. We have converted a lot of that land to chaparral, which exacerbates the fire issue, and it's not sequestering carbon. So I think we just throw that out for everybody to think about. We need to build that into our plan for restoration of California, but I think the whole Western United States. So thank you so much, Jessica. I'll turn it back to Mike.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, Jessica, thank you very much. And I think you said lots of great things there, encouraging things. I was really glad to hear you say that the state's looking at removing hurdles and trying to pave the way for some more infrastructure development from small to big projects. And that's what we need, and keep up that good work. And we'll see you on the next forum or wherever. Thank you. Okay. Now for our keynote speaker, and thank you for sitting in that chair so long, Jim, waiting for us. I want to introduce Mr. Jim Hubbard, and I want to note that on our agenda we don't quite have his title right, so I'm going to get it right now in the sketch that biographical sketch he provided. Jim Hubbard was sworn into the office as Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at the U.S. State Department of Agriculture in September 6, 2018. In this role, he oversees the work of the USDA Forest Service for our whole country. In 2016, he retired from the U.S. Forest Service as Deputy Chief for State and Private Forestry. Look at this responsibility he had. With the responsibility for fire and aviation management, national fire planning, cooperative forest programs, forest health protection, conservation education, urban and community forestry, and Office of Tribal Relations. Any spare time after that? I doubt it. Between November 2004 and October 2005, Hubbard served as the Director of the Office of Wildland Fire Coordination with the Department of the Interior. In this position, he had oversight for the implementation of the National Fire Plan and activities of the 5 land managing bureaus for forest fire prevention, mitigation, and partnerships with communities, tribes, and stakeholders. Jim was a member of the Colorado Forest Service for over 34 years before coming to the Federal Service in 2004. He served as Colorado State Forester from 1984 through 2004. Jim was a leader in the National Association of State Foresters and chaired the Council of Western State Foresters. He provided national leadership in the state organization through his many committee assignments, including the chairman of the Legislative Committee. Jim served as a liaison to the Western Governors Association during the development of the implementation strategy for the National Fire Plan. Jim holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Forest Management from Colorado State University and is an honor alum of the College of Natural Resources. Jim grew up in Kenosha, did I say that right, Jim? Close. That's in rural Kansas, where he enjoyed being in the woods, exploring new territory and working the land. He and his wife Cindy have 3 grown daughters, and we're very, very fortunate. From Washington, D.C., Undersecretary Jim Hubbard, thank you very much.
Well, you're probably wondering about that. Enjoyed being in the woods in Kansas, but I won't get into that. This is about the politics of the day, as Jessica mentioned. That's my current perspective, and that's what I'm bringing to you now. But before I do that, just an observation from what you've heard this morning and what you already know. I think you're doing it right here. This is the way it works, and Mike and Greg and Jason and Jessica all described that in a very good way. If we had more of that, we'd be in a better position. And I'm pretty sure that standing behind all of that and cracking the whip is this Randy guy over here. So thanks, Randy. Wildfire today. A little bit of what I've been dealing with for a long time, and it won't go away, and we still haven't solved the problem, even though we know what the solutions are. But it's becoming more of a problem. We're setting records every year for what's going on with wildfire, the size of wildfire, the intensity of wildfire, the length of the seasons, all of that. When I was in Colorado, I first decided I had to spend some time trying to do something about wildfire when we had a 125,000 acre wildfire burn up to the edge of Denver. That was a big deal, and if you looked at the Front Range of Colorado, there wasn't room for that kind of a fire without doing serious harm to a whole lot of values and a whole lot of people. And now we're talking about million-acre fires. Goodness. So a little bit about the politics of the day. We hear a lot about what's going on here. Is this climate change? Is this forest management? What is it? I'll say that from the standpoint of climate, it's certainly an accelerator, as it has been described. We are in extended droughts. We do have higher temperatures. We do have lower humidities. We do have longer seasons. Here we are at approaching November, and we still have 8,000 firefighters deployed. That's unheard of. So it does continue to be an issue in terms of effect on the forest. What I pay more attention to in terms of what we can do about it, in my role at least, is forest condition. And forest condition has to do with this fuel load and the fuel moisture. The fuel load that's standing, the fuel loads that's down, the low fuel moistures that make all of that inclined to burn hot and burn large. Part of that is the systems in the West that we're dealing with, the ecological systems. The fact that fire has always been part of those systems. Anywhere from a lodgepole pine forest that's created by disturbance and is at the point in its life cycle in the West where it's ready to be regenerated by disturbance, to those systems that have more frequent fire, that need to come and visit and do what it does, and in a way that isn't as natural now, in part because of those trade-offs that were made a long time ago that said we're going to do things differently and we're going to take fire out of the system. Maybe we took more out of the system than we should have, but that's another debate. What do we do about any of that now? Well, the current politics that I deal with says we do more active forest management. That is one thing we can do about this and we should do about this. But a little bit about the politics of managing unplanned wildfire. That comes into play too. Do we in fact manage unplanned wildfire in a way that reintroduces fire back into that system? It's a little more difficult when that system's out of whack. It means you're going to have more fire that burns in ways you're not used to. We're seeing that. And when you have a lot of values at risk, that's a problem. It still doesn't mean we should ignore how we use unplanned wildfire, but only in a way that is pre-seasoned, that is pre-planned, that is unified in its approach so that everybody agrees, yes, maybe this makes sense in this place. And that won't be everywhere. The other part of that is how we use prescribed fire. And a lot of folks, especially where they don't have a commercial solution to moving material out of the forest, are saying, all right, our prescribed fires need to be much larger. And maybe they do in places, as long as that's something that people agree to. The other part of the prescribed fire is that our scientists, Forest Service scientists, will tell you we can't cut our way out of this problem. That doesn't mean you don't harvest. It just means that that's only one step in the process. You've got to put fire back on the ground under those harvested lands to really reduce the risk. So how fire plays in this is pretty important. But as for the active management, which is what I want to spend more time on, is there's a lot of things we need to do. It starts with NEPA. Our planning process, our environmental clearance process is cumbersome, and maybe it's more than we have to have. I'm not proposing that we get rid of it. I'm not proposing that we don't do what the law prescribes. I am proposing that there may be some ways that are more efficient, that maybe we have done more than the law prescribes, and we can cut back on that process in terms of time and efficiency, and I think we can. You've seen a recent NEPA rule, government-wide NEPA rule proposed that's out, that will go into effect. That takes a step for all government agencies in relation to NEPA, but the Forest Service had its own rule proposed that had to be held back until this government-wide rule played out. Hopefully that can move forward. It has some more specifics it tries to be more efficient where we don't have objections and take some of the processes off the table that we spend a lot of time and money on that maybe we don't need to, and concentrate then on where we do need to spend the time and money with the right kind of NEPA negotiations on getting the law implemented. So hopefully we can continue to make some improvements in that process so that we can move faster in getting our work done. Industry is another key element of this. In this county, you have the advantage of some existing processing infrastructure that makes all the difference. Many places don't. I know California has seen reduction in capacity in processing, but you still have some alive and well here, and what I have seen is if we're going to make any significant progress in active management, that's an essential component, an existing processing infrastructure that the industry is still supporting and the industry can still rely on. Markets are also important. Fortunately, we're having some good markets for dimensional lumber at this point in time, but that comes and goes, that ebbs and flows up and down. But it's what we rely on primarily. However, that's for the commercial side of things. For the non-commercial side of things, we need such things as what Greg was talking about with biomass. And hats off to you guys for getting into that business. A 25 megawatt plant that just stood up in 1985 and that's still going. That's pretty remarkable, Mike. I don't know of too many of those that are supported by wood. So those are important elements to making all of this work. I think you're going to need some government policy too. If we're going to expand this, if we're going to maintain this, you're going to have some policies that make it easier for us to accomplish, that fit in where we have some barriers, and we do, that give some relief to those barriers, or at least help out with those, so that we can make more of this kind of activity happen. The last element that I think is part of this active forest management is the culture of the U.S. Forest Service. And I think what you'll find is that all across the country, this is an agency that is dedicated to meeting expectations. So if an expectation is set, this is an agency that wants to do that. Sure, we have differences of opinion about approach and what's most important and what we should act on and what we should step back from, but if the agency is given the direction that this is the expectation from those who are involved in overseeing the agency, they will try to meet it. And I think you've seen that in active management. I think you've seen a step forward in trying to produce more active management and reduce more wildfire risk. I think that will continue, regardless of administration. And in part, it's that continuance is because of these shared stewardship agreements that were mentioned. We have the approach. Secretary Perdue was a former governor, so he thinks that states might have a say in what we want to accomplish. Yes, these are federal lands and they belong to everybody, but within a state there's differences, and across the country with our national forest there's differences. Our forest plans reflect those differences. And those forest plans are an expression of a process that includes a lot of input from a lot of people that says this is what we think is most important. Okay, so now if we're going to do something on those lands, if we're going to have land treatment, then we get into the processes of environmental clearance that also bring those voices into the room. I think you'll see the Forest Service continue to do that, but through shared stewardship, the Forest Service approached the governors in the West and said, these are our priorities. What are your priorities within the state? How do you see this playing out? What do you think is most important? We know we don't have enough financial resource to cover all of the needs. So what's most important to you? Here's what's most important to us, and here's where we think we should be doing this kind of work. And let's sit down and talk about what our mutual priorities might be that we can invest in, that'll provide the best return on investment. And maybe if we think about doing this without regard to boundary, we can do it at a larger scale that might make a difference. Right now, small projects don't have a lot of effect. So let's see if we can increase the size of some of these projects so that we can make a difference, so that we have a chance of stopping wildfire where values at risk are threatened. All of that's part of what goes into a shared stewardship agreement. It's it's kind of like Jessica and Jason sitting down and agreeing to what's most important. And then starting to go after that together. In California, the shared stewardship agreement calls for the state to produce 500,000 acres a year, 500,000 acres a year of land treatment. It also says, hey, Forest Service, how about you doing 500,000 acres a year too? So that's in there as well, that we'll both step up to try to increase our pace and do it at a larger scale. And we'll set those priorities together and go after where we think we have the highest need and where we think we can get the best return on investment. So I think you'll see those agreements, which every Western governor jumped on, stay in effect. I think you'll see the state say, this is what we want from you, federal government, U.S. Forest Service, regardless of who's in the White House or who's controlling Congress. I think those are going to be a key element of making sure we all hold each other's feet to the fire. One other thing I'll mention, which kind of plays out in California, is this whole notion of carbon. Carbon is a big deal. Carbon capture is a big deal. Recently, you may have heard the U.S. and the President commit to the World Economic Forum's Trillion Trees initiative. Plant a trillion trees worldwide in the next 10 years. So what started to happen, there's a U.S. chapter of Trillion Trees that has started to match up corporate interest in carbon neutrality with tree planting. And pledges are being made so far, pledges of about 1 billion trees from corporate sponsorship in the U.S. What came out of all of that is that the banking institutions who are part of this whole endeavor and paying attention to carbon capture have come to me and said, tree planting isn't enough. We have more demand from corporate sponsors than tree planting can meet. We're going to have to move from planting into forest management. And yes, that's a little trickier. Yes, that will raise more questions. But we've got at least 400 of the 500 Fortune 500 companies that want to accomplish carbon neutrality in the next 10 to 20 years. And they are ready to make that kind of investment. So will you tell us how we have a credible way of accounting for carbon capture on the national forest such that a corporate sponsor could contribute to the land treatments that it would take to put that forest in the right condition to generate credible carbon capture. Just one more mix in the scheme of things of how we might go about this. So whether it's NEPA, Industry Markets, Government Policy Agency, Shared Stewardship, all of those things, and all that go with those. It's not any one of them by itself solves the problem. It's all of that together, and you throw in any other opportunities that come along. Land treatment industry, scale, boundaries, focus, and one more thing long term. If this forest is going to do 100,000 acres of its 900,000 acres a year, you got a few years to make that, to get all of that accomplished. That's pretty much the case everywhere. We're looking for movement in the right direction for more land treatment. We want it to occur now, and we want to see that happening, and that is happening. It's incremental, but it is moving in that direction. What this all means is it'll take us some time to get there, though. So the commitment isn't just to turn the corner and start to address some of these issues in the next year or two. It's the next 10 years. So hopefully we can put together the kind of approach that will let us address these kinds of problems, let us address these kinds of barriers, all of which are doable. And we can make this happen. And then we got to stick with it a while. From that long introduction that Mike had to read, I've been sticking with this for a while. And I think it's worth doing. That's why I'm still at it. And I think we can get there. This season was unusual, but I'm not sure it's going to prove to be that unusual from here on. We're going to have more of this. That force condition is going to tell us and remind us that there's work to be done out there. And hopefully we can get enough of that done that we can get the right kind of a balance between what happens on the land and what happens to the values that we want to protect. One more thing. We've mentioned it, but this really is about, in terms of crossing the boundaries, this really is about what you do on the national forest, what you do on the private land, what you do in the community. And I would argue that any one of those by itself does not reduce the risk the way you're looking for. It has to be all three of those together. That the public lands have to be treated, the private lands have to be treated. If you have a fire on the national forest, and I hear about this a lot, it's your unmanaged national forest that causes all of our problems. It burns off the national forest and causes trouble. Well, you know well in this state that it goes both ways, and it's not just the national forest. But even if, so we reduce the risk on the national forest and you don't reduce the risk on the private lands, then you haven't protected what you want to. And if that protection happens to be a community, then the community has to do something. I'm not going to ever prescribe community code, but we have plenty of information that says these kinds of things can happen. You got your choice of a lot of different things you can do. And I would argue that you have to make some of those choices. If the community doesn't actively engage, then even if we reduce the intensity of the fire that approaches a community, it could still have problems, especially if it gets into a susceptible community. And you don't have some response capability and you don't have some building resistance. So all of that combined is part of deciding where we want to make this investment, where we'll get the return on the investment. And the Forest Service should not be doing that by itself. It should be doing that with the state and with the collaborative groups. I thank you for having me. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions, Mike.
I always have a couple of questions.
Imagine that.
Jim, I want to say thanks for coming out here and being here with us. And we're glad that you're there leading this effort in Washington. Experienced guy like you. Do we have the right level of skill and staffing in the Forest Service? I mean, I hear that all the time. And how can we make up for that if we don't? And actually, we need more of everything anyway. So, any thoughts on that?
Sure. That comes up quite a bit, Randy. And I guess I should start with Mike's plea as he introduced Jason. That's some of the skills that we need, good forest supervisors that fit in with the community and manage the forest accordingly. So I'm going to have to tell Jason that forget promotions until he gets all this work done. He has to stay here. Sorry, Jason.
I just did in Jason's career.
But we do have some, it's not that we don't have capacity, but you'll always hear we need more capacity. That just goes with the nature of this beast. There's more work than we can get done. But I'm not as worried about our total capacity as I am our specific skill sets and having the right skill sets in the right places. And we still have some work to do with that. If active land treatment is what we're going to focus on, then we need to adjust some of the skill sets to put the right people in the woods to get that done. You've got to have a good contracting officer out there supervising things that understands what the needs are and can work with the industry to get that treatment accomplished. We're doing better, but yeah, we've got some a ways to go in places to make sure we've rearranged that set of skills.
Okay, another issue, of course, is, everything takes so long. There's so much paperwork, so much regulatory process. Anything we can do or should be doing to kind of clean up the process? And of course, the question always comes, how can we help you? We desperately need you to be successful. And is there anything we can do to do that? So just a couple there.
Well, a couple of things. I think doing something about the NEPA process and helping it to be more responsive, more timely, less burdensome in terms of how much analysis we do. That kind of falls to us. I think we have a policy proposal coming forward. As soon as the government-wide NEPA policy clears, then Forest Service conforms to that and releases its own proposal. And I think that'll go a long way to helping improve the NEPA process, to streamline it, but still meet the requirements of the law. In implementing it, however, is where you might come in, because it doesn't say we're throwing out anything. It says we're getting a little sharper with our focus. But there'll be a lot of people that'll say, well, wait a minute, you're not cutting corners, are you? You're not doing the kinds of things we fought so long to make sure we're holding you accountable for. All of that'll be debated locally and debated through collaboratives. And I would just urge everybody to come to that table and have those discussions. But hopefully it feeds into a process that only takes 1 year instead of 3 years and only involves 100 pages instead of 1,000.
And just to follow up to that, I mean, you and I have talked a little. I pretty close to rimfire during the fire and after the fire, and one of the things that I guess I would like to see done, and I'm asking if there's any hope of this kind of thing happening, on the private lands, which were mostly SPI, but there were a lot of other private lands, they went to work immediately. and got it done. And we went through an accelerated program. I give Richard Stem a lot of credit for that because he spearheaded that for the Forest Service. And we got our record decision roughly a year after the fire started, not after it ended, but because it lasted a long time. But it seems to me that things like roadside hazard trees and some of that kind of thing could be done under a programmatic NEPA or something like that, so that we could in fact get started as soon as the fire's gone or safe. Is there any hope of getting that kind of stuff?
Couple of reactions. The Forest Service NEPA reform proposals do try to address those actions where we don't have objection, and move those faster. And so I think that'll help some. The bigger question of post-fire recovery, though, that's a major policy issue that hasn't been adequately addressed. And so whether we're talking about salvage logging, or whether we're talking about soil movement, or whether we're talking about other forms of restoration following these kinds of large, intense fires, that's a major issue still. And I'd say that's mostly unaddressed.
Jim, you've heard me say a couple times in lamenting the imports that we have coming into California and into our nation in general, and we've lost sawmills around the country and certainly in California. I'm just wondering if, to get infrastructure back here, what role do you see the federal government in general, but maybe specifically the Forest Service, playing in getting some of these facilities back so they can operate long term?
So I'd start with hang on to what you've got, because it's really hard to bring it back. And we see that now when you have some still in some processing presence. It's easier to add to that and bring some back and expand on that than it is in areas where you've lost it completely and have to start over. So hang on to what you've got and build on that if you can. What I hear mostly from the forest industry is the Forest Service role in that is to reestablish a higher level of volume produced, and do it over a long enough period of time, several years, where it gives industry the confidence that maybe that's going to continue, and maybe they can capitalize what they need to expand their processing, whether that's adding another shift, adding another mill. They're in a position, the large industry, they're in a position to do that, but they need to see that this is an investment that they can count on into the future. And the way they judge that from the Forest Service is how much harvest you're doing, and whether or not you're going to continue that trend.
Okay, I got one more, and I just like your perspective for everybody's benefit, and that is, I see loggers and some of these other people, and they're working on an annual or contract, and that just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, of course, I'm a private sector guy, and I like long-term commitment, and partnership. Is there anything we can do about that from the national perspective?
Yeah, I think Congress continues to be receptive to exploring that. So, for instance, we can make a 20-year commitment in a stewardship contract now. That's not everything we might want it to be, but it's a step in the right direction. It's recognition that if you really want to get this done, and you really want to do that in partnership with the industry that's taking the risk and putting up the money, then you've got to give them some assurance that that's a reasonable risk. And the length of a contract is part of that assurance. We haven't moved that as far into the commercial operation, the timber management of the Forest Service. But I think the decision makers that approve that kind of policy are looking at how you doing with what we gave you, and is this working out, and how much resistance do you run into, and are we handling this in a way that maybe we can take another step?
Let me just throw you out a concept. When we in Tuolumne County signed our master stewardship agreement, we were only allowed 10 years at that time. And my comment was 10 years isn't enough. I mean, we're hard. Well, actually, we're doing very well with it. So I'm not complaining, but it's not enough because you got to get started. And so I was suggesting that they have. I'll buy the 20-year agreement if we can look at renewing it for another 20 years at the 10-year period. So we always have a minimum of 10 years. And I'm thinking of that from the perspective of the people that need to invest to make it happen. And I just throw that out to you as a thought. You don't have to comment on it. I'll see if we got any more questions out here. Jim, you answered a bunch of the questions I had on my sheet already, so I guess I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Stay up here for just a minute with us, Jim. So we've reached that point in the program. I don't know, you may all have been really hoping for. It's called the closing remarks. And I'm gonna make a couple here, and they're gonna be short and sweet. But first, thank you to all the presenters. Thank you, Jim, for excellent presentations. Jessica, if you can still hear us out there, thank you so much for your presentation. Jason, so well done. Greg, I know had to leave. Did I forget anybody? I don't know. But what? Mike, oh, I didn't do much on that. But yeah, there was a good movie though. That was. But here's why I wanted Jim to stay up here. At our Associated California Loggers board meetings, I've got a little tradition where I award the person that traveled the farthest to be with us. And Jim Hubbard came from Washington, D.C. He won that in spades, and it's always a bottle of red wine, which I have here for you. It's from a local vineyard. And So thank you for traveling so far, and if I were you, I'd sneak that on the airplane and see if you can drink a little bit of it on the way home. Thank you very much, Jim. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And we're gonna close up here, and I gotta say some other thank yous though, very quickly, obviously, to Melinda Fleming back there, our executive director. She is always quietly working in the background on every one of these summits and all the things we do. Thank you. Without Melinda, these things would not happen. Thank you, Melinda. You did so well. And board member Randy Hanbelt set this whole program up, made the contacts to get all these speakers here. Randy, fantastic work. It really went well. Thank you very much. And yep. And then our virtual forestry tour, I'd like to thank Mike LaRue and Visionary Video and their photography team, and then Ryan Scheller and Sound Extreme. Thank you for setting all this good sound work up. You guys just did a fabulous job. It came off very well. Thank you guys for all of that. Thank you to all of you, if you're still out there in outer space, as I call it, for attending, for you folks that stayed with us here. And I'll end with, let's just go out and see if we can make some powerful change in the forest. Thank you all. See you soon. Oh yeah, thank you, dear. So, and I have to announce on your way out, Melinda's got COVID-19 release forms. I guess everybody's got to sign a release form. I don't know what you're releasing. Don't release anything bad. But just see Melinda back there. You got to sign something to get out the door. Adios. Thank you all. Bye-bye.